Altered State of Consciousness and Healing Therapies. Raul Valverde, Ph.D. Introduction. Transpersonal psychotherapy, that is based on transpersonal psychology, considers that the psyche is multidimensional, and there are several levels of consciousness, and each has different characteristics, and is governed by different laws. Transpersonal psychology does not deny other schools of thought, as psychoanalysis does not arise as opposed. Transpersonal psychology is the study of human nature and development proceeds on the assumption that human beings possess potentials that exceed the limits of ego developed normally. A main goal of transpersonal theory is to integrate the spiritual experience within a broader understanding of the human psyche and consciousness. Groff, 1988. The trend to explain consciousness by applying quantum theories has gained popularity in recent years, and, although clearly disdained by neuroscientists, more and more researchers direct their steps this way up. Brian D. Josephson, 1962, of the University of Cambridge, winner of the 1973 Nobel Prize in Physics, for his studies on the quantum effects and superconductors. Josephson effect proposes a unified field theory, quantum nature, that would explain not only the consciousness and its attributes, but also all the phenomenology observed to date in terms of parapsychological and mystical experiences. Another character that has stood in defense of the theory quantum of consciousness was the physicist Roger Penrose, 1994. Penrose, based on the mathematical theorem of Gödel and based on subsequent elaborations, concludes that no system is deterministic. A system that is based on rules and deductions cannot explain the creative powers of the mind and judgment. This nullifies the claim of classic physics to structure deterministic processes into a complex phenomenon of consciousness. Penrose says that only the peculiar characteristics of non-deterministic quantum physics could issue an approximate judgment on consciousness within a theory that involved quantum phenomena, macro-physical, and conditions of non-locality. Every human being acts contacting the physical world through his mind, which acts as consciousness. The physical brain is a computer with its data warehouse. The mind is the result of energy which acts to encourage the operation of synchronizing the mental spheres, which are the areas of energy that influence on different levels of consciousness. This energy manifests itself in different ways in order to transform the same energy. Vibration changes depending on the characteristics of the vibration, that is, the representation of that energy. The perception of the human energy depends on the direction through which he can capture the vibration it has at the moment. The human being experiences different altered states of consciousness. Thus, we find pathological states of consciousness, as in the case of severe depression, especially in the case of psychosis, states of consciousness, as deep hypnosis produced by hallucinogenic drugs like LSD, and even altered states of consciousness common to the practice of yoga, as is the case of mystical ecstasy. Stanley Krippner, 2000, defines altered states of consciousness as mental states that can be subjectively recognized by an individual or by an objective observer, and the individual who experiences it as different in mental functions: the normal state of the individual, the alertness, and the waking. In fact, 20 states have been provisionally identified, with considerable overlap, as worthy of further study. Altered states of consciousness have been used as psychotherapy in transpersonal psychology. One of these techniques is known as holotropic breathwork, that is produced by using hyperventilation, making the individual breathing deeply and rapidly for several minutes. Groff, 1994, with this technique, causes a crisis that leads to an altered state of consciousness and allows the study the consciousness of the individual from that new state. Stanislav Grof, 1994, uses the experiential healing power of this new state of consciousness to cure his patients. Neurotechnology offers an alternative way to induce altered state of consciousness for transpersonal therapy that can be easily implemented with the use of quantum computer technology and used in combination with the Internet to facilitate online transpersonal therapy. Altered states of consciousness cover transpersonal experiences that involve an expansion of consciousness beyond the limits of time and space. Altered states of consciousness allow us to answer the questions of who we really are and why we are here. Topics included in this book are spirituality, intuitions, channeling, neurotechnology, and holotropic therapy. Transpersonal psychology. Transpersonal psychology considers that the psyche is multidimensional. There are several levels of consciousness, and each has different characteristics and is governed by different laws. Transpersonal psychology does not deny other schools of thought, as psychoanalysis does not arise as opposed. Right thing would be to say that attempts to go further. For a transpersonal vision, Freud developments have been of fundamental value in the development of psychological science, to include the idea of the unconscious in a discipline that was tied to the positivist rationalism. Certainly, psychoanalysis opened the possibilities of understanding of the human psyche. Transpersonal psychology promotes another opening, including the spiritual dimension of the human being. Transpersonal psychology is the study of human nature and development proceeds on the assumption that human beings possess potentials that exceed the limits of ego developed normally. A main goal of transpersonal theory is to integrate the spiritual experience within a broader understanding of the human psyche. Transpersonal psychology, if known to mainstream psychologists at all, is most often associated with New Age crystal gazers, astrologers, believers in witchcraft, drug users, meditators, occultists, spiritual healers, martial artists, and other purveyors of pop psychology. The stereotype is, of course, inaccurate. For, like the fabled philosopher S. Stone, its seemingly weird exterior masks a more important philosophical challenge, the full articulation and subsequent flowering of which may yet prove to be the undoing of the reductionist mainstream. Taylor, 1992, S. I. Shapiro and Philip L. Gross, co-editors of the International Journal of Transpersonal Studies, and transpersonal psychologist Grace W. Lee, in 2002 conducted a thematic analysis of 80 English-language passages in the transpersonal literature published in a variety of sources including books, journal articles, websites, brochures, newsletters, dictionaries, encyclopedias, school catalogs, and convention papers between 1991 through 2001 that address the essence. Transpersonal psychology. A thematic analysis of these passages revealed that the two most frequent categories, occurring 53, 66.2%, and 49, 61.2% times, respectively, were going beyond or transcending the individual, ego, self, the personal, personality, or personal identity, existence of a deeper, true, or authentic self, and b. spirituality. Psychospiritual development, the spiritual, spirit. Other, less frequent themes included special states of consciousness, interconnectivity/unity, going beyond other schools of psychology, emphasis on a scientific approach, mysticism, full range of consciousness, greater potential, inclusion of non-Western psychologies, meditation, and existence of a wider reality. Shapiro, Lee, and Gross, 2002. In the first public announcement of transpersonal psychology given in a lecture at the First Unitarian Church in San Francisco in 1967, Abraham H. Maslow provides a preliminary and informal description of transhumanistic psychology, later called transpersonal psychology. Transhumanistic psychology deals with transcendent experiences and with transcendent values. The fully developed and very fortunate human being, working under the best conditions, tends to be motivated by values which transcends the geographical limitations of the self. Thus one begins to talk about transhumanistic psychology. Maslow, 1969. Transpersonal psychotherapist Anthony Sutich, founder and first editor of the Journal of Transpersonal Psychology, provides one of the first formal definitions of transpersonal psychology in 1969 in the inaugural issue of the Journal of Transpersonal Psychology, Volume 1, Number 1, Spring 1969. The emerging transpersonal psychology, fourth force, is concerned specifically with the empirical, scientific study of, and responsible implementation of the findings relevant to becoming, individual and species-wide mate needs, ultimate values, unitive consciousness, peak experiences, B. Values, ecstasy, mystical experience, or being, self-actualization, essence, bliss, wonder, ultimate meaning, transcendence of self, spirit, oneness, cosmic awareness, individual and species-wide synergy, maximal interpersonal encounter, sacralization of everyday life, transcendental phenomena, cosmic self-humor and playfulness, maximal sensory awareness, responsiveness and expression, and related concepts, experiences, and activities. Suttich, 1969. Elmer Green and Alice Green, pioneer researchers of biofeedback and the voluntary control of internal states, define transpersonal psychology within the context of ultimate values and meaning. Transpersonal psychology might be defined as the psychology of ultimate or highest meanings and values, and psychologists who explore in this area must be prepared to examine all institutions and activities from the point of view of such meanings and values. Green and Green, 1971. Edgar Mitchell, Apollo 14 astronaut and founder of the Institute of Noetic Sciences, an organization that chronicles news, data, and opinions from the interdisciplinary field of consciousness research. Publishes Psychic Exploration, a challenge for science, that offers a definition of transpersonal psychology within the context of parapsychology. Transpersonal psychology is a new major psychological approach to the study of the person that emphasizes humanity's ultimate development or transcendent potential as individuals and the species, a blend of the best in science and religion. Transpersonal psychology takes its place within noetics, the general study of consciousness. Mitchell and White, 1974. Charles T. Tartus, 1975. Book Transpersonal Psychologies, the first major work to systematically examine the world as major religions and spiritual traditions from a transpersonal perspective, identifies humanity as spiritual traditions, i.e., Zen Buddhism, Yoga, Christianity, Sufism, as traditional transpersonal psychologies. Traditional transpersonal psychologies, which I shall call spiritual psychologies, deal with human experience in the realm we call spiritual, that vast realm of human potential dealing with ultimate purposes, with higher entities, with God, with love, with compassion, with purpose. Start, 1992. Roger Walsh and Francis Vaughan published one of the first collections of writings from contemporary contributors to the transpersonal literature in their book Beyond Ego, Transpersonal Dimensions in Psychology, offered the following definition of transpersonal psychology. Transpersonal psychology is concerned with expanding the field of psychological inquiry to include the study of optimal psychological health and well-being. It recognizes the potential for experiencing a broad range of states of consciousness, in some of which identity may extend beyond the usual limits of the ego and personality. Walsh and Vaughan, 1980. Physicist Fritjof Capra, author of international bestsellers The Tao of Physics and The Turning Point, a book that was subsequently turned into a nationally acclaimed film called Mind Walk, provides a definition of the new transpersonal psychology that conceives it to be a vital part of the ongoing scientific, social, and cultural shift from a reductionistic and materialistic worldview toward a more holistic paradigm of science and spirit. Transpersonal psychology is concerned, directly or indirectly, with the recognition, understanding, and realization of non-ordinary, mystical, or transpersonal states of consciousness, and with the psychological conditions that represent barriers to such transpersonal realization. This new psychology is consistent with the system's view of life, and in harmony with the views of spiritual traditions that sees the human organism as an integrated whole involving interdependent physical and psychological patterns, and recognizes that the psychological situation of an individual cannot be separated from the emotional, social, and cultural environment. Capra, 1982. Psychologists Leonard Zusnet and Warren Jones published the book Anomalistic Psychology, a study of extraordinary phenomena of behavior and experience that clarifies the relationship between transpersonal psychology and traditional concepts of the occult. Transpersonal psychology is concerned with meaningful and spiritual aspects of life, such as peak experiences, transcendence of self, self-actualization, and cosmic consciousness. As such, It only partially subsumes traditional occult concepts. Zusna and Jones, 1982. It is the study of states of consciousness and the full potential of man, assumes that humans can achieve harmony, unity, and transcendence through spiritual development. Transpersonal, it is something that exceeds the range of their own experience or personal history. Transpersonal refers to that which is beyond trance of the person or mask. That is, who or what is essentially being. It is with the study of states of consciousness and the full potential of man that transpersonal psychology assumes that humans can achieve harmony and transcend through spiritual development. Transpersonal is something that exceeds the range of human's own experience or personal history. Transpersonal refers to that which is beyond of the person, who is the essential being. Much of its discoveries and contributions come from the study of Eastern religions and Christian mysticism. Transpersonal psychology is interested in the different forms of Buddhism, for meditation, for yoga, for mystical experiences, psychophysiological effects, that all these phenomena, the limits of consciousness, etc. The ultimate goal of all this is to try to achieve an awakening, that is the greater awareness, that would raise the level of being. That integrates psychology and spirituality. Stanislav Grof, co-founder of Transpersonal Psychology with Abraham Maslow, defines transpersonal psychology as the psychology that respects the entire spectrum of human experience, including holotropic states and all domains of the psyche, biographical, perinatal and transpersonal. Grof, 2000. Transpersonal psychology covers a multitude of experiences and behaviors produced by spontaneous or altered states of consciousness, impulses into higher states of being, and extraordinary spiritual practices induced. Transpersonal phenomena include the meditative experiences, dreaming, drug-induced psychedelia, peak experiences, cosmic consciousness, enlightenment, mysticism, out-of-body experiences, channeling trance, near-death experiences, memories, reincarnations, extrasensory awareness, archetypal phenomena, accelerated learning, exceptional state of health and well-being, the mind-body healing, and miraculous cures. Parapsychological phenomena are important for the reduction of science and spirit implications. Much of his discoveries and contributions come from the study of Eastern religions and Christian mysticism. He is interested in the different forms of Buddhism, for meditation, for yoga, for mystical experiences, psychophysiological effects, that all these phenomena, the limits of consciousness, etc. The ultimate goal of all this is to try to achieve an awakening, then a greater awareness, that would raise the level of being. Integrate psychology and spirituality. In the book of Stanislav Grof, 1994, Transpersonal Psychology is described as the perception of the spiritual dimension in a psychological language. Many things that happen in this world seem to make no sense, and they really do not make sense if we consider only the material dimension. Suffering and death seems meaningless, even life often seems meaningless as well. But if our view includes the spiritual dimension, from this new angle of view everything is different, and what before was meaningless, it acquires now a new meaning. This is what happens with many concepts of orthodox psychology that seems to be dominated by randomness and chaos. Only in the light of certain esoteric and religious knowledge the exquisite order is appreciated. This is what transpersonal psychology brings, the order and direction, where there seem to be randomness and chaos. The therapist, for example, often goes short of arguments to the thinking of who is tempted to commit suicide. Only if the therapist has a clear idea about the perennial values, he or she would have the ability to persuade the potential suicidal person with determination and effectiveness. Grof, 1994. Transpersonal psychology is used to understand the spiritual human being, which is beyond the three-dimensional reality, and includes the ability to understand what cannot be defined. The transpersonal world connotes eternal spiritual values that go beyond the individual, and that we see as inherent to the person, and go even beyond space and time. With transpersonal psychology, we see that the great puzzle of the meaning of life is only resolved if we have this eternal context. Unless we have the spiritual dimension, nothing makes sense. and, of course, does not make sense from the transpersonal psychological point of view. Graph 2010. Kent Wilber, 1996, one of the theoreticians of transpersonal psychology, considers that the most used tool by professionals in transpersonal psychology is the use of transpersonal experiences through altered states of consciousness for self-exploration. In this article, we will focus on transpersonal experiences through altered states of consciousness from the parapsychology context. Quantum physics: what we are able to perceive with our five senses is not reality. Quantum physics has shown that space and time are illusions of perception. Our body cannot really be reality if it does not occupy most of the space it seems to occupy. An experiment made at the University of Manchester revealed the shape of the interior of an atom is almost entirely empty space. The question then became how we could possibly make the world around us see us if this is the case. Russell, et al., 1993. Our true consciousness does not exist in our brains or in our bodies, but this illusion of our individual bodies along with the misinformation of our true origins has manifested the idea that we all think independently from one another. With this understanding, it seems possible to scientifically explain telepathy, clairvoyance, spiritual mediums related to the transfer of information between sources without physical means of communication phenomena. But when we understand that there is a common spiritual bond between all things in the universe, and that we are all part of a divine intelligence, this simple understanding fills all the holes in modern religions and predictions about the future, and literally every occurrence of events. Russell, et al., 1993. According to quantum physics, the physical world, and its reality, it's just a recreation of the observed. We created the body and reality, as we create the experience of our world in its different manifestations dimensional. In its essential state, atomic or cosmic subquantum micro, the body is made of energy and information, not solid matter. This is only a meager level of perception. According to Tornell, 2001, this is energy and information arising from the endless fields of energy and information spanning the entire universal creation. When looking at the electronic microscope, we are looking at our microcosm. We then can see how the quantum particles manifest virtually as a symphony and intelligent orchestration at speeds much higher than the visible light. This quantum view also represents the immutability of our macrocosm. In this reality, each individual inhabits a reality that is beyond all change, as more deep within us without the knowledge of our three-dimensional or physical outer senses. There is a core of being, an energy field, that creates immortality in nature and manifests as the physical body. This core is the essential being or soul, primordial seed, which is contained in an atom called seed. We are seeds of eternal essence at this stage of quantum eternity. This is the seed based on new paradigms posed by Planck, Maxwell, Faraday, Heisenberg, Schrödinger, Bohr, Einstein, and Hawking, among many other pioneers of quantum mechanics. They understood that the way to see the world in their time was very wrong. Within the quantum paradigm, we are more than our physical body. Our true self and personality are governed by the rules of the principle of cause and effect, and are embedded into a body for the duration of human life. The field of human life is open and unlimited in its deeper quantum level. This means that we are immortal and timeless. Once we identify with the eternal reality that is consistent with quantum vision of the universe, we will enter the new paradigms of quantum consciousness. Everything that exists has a natural vibration to its atoms all the way up to the immensity of the universe to show a simple connection between land and our bodies. It was Democritus, 5 centuries before the birth of Christ, who first suggested that the matter was not continuous, that is, which it was made by adhering small pieces infinitely between, yes, to which he called atoms, indivisible in Greek. Perhaps in those ancient times, science was not aware of the importance of this. It took centuries, not only to accept the theory, but already including his own name atom. Much of quantum phenomenology is still theory, but some theories that have led to advances, as the transistor, television, communications satellites, X-ray devices, computers, and the atomic bomb, with all the negative charge that entails, but also gave place to the cobalt bomb, scanners, nuclear power plants, etc. Current technical structure, it would not be possible or even imaginable without the knowledge and application of quantum mechanics. Lord Rutherford of Nelson, a professor at Cambridge, in the early years of the 20th century, was the first to describe the atom experimentally as a kind of planetary system dimensions unimaginably tiny. In the center was what he called atomic nucleus, positively charged and turned around a swarm of electrons, negatively charged, in a perfect balance. Subsequently, he identified the positive charge of the nucleus was equal to the number of electrons that revolved around it, and in turn equal to the atomic number in the periodic table. Subsequent processing and measurements of this scheme, called Rutherford atom, evolved into new and more complex theory. Max Planck in the Christmas gathering of German Physical Society took the stand to outline what it would be a revolutionary proposal, James, et al. 2011. The light, which until then was supposed to be made of continuous waves without interruption, was now conveyed also in small packets of energy, with the Mount's energy package well defined, to this minimal. Planck called this energy package quanto. This amount power was proportional to the frequency of vibration light wave, or electromagnetic emission, that were, and thus it was unchanged for a given wavelength. Any amount of energy that is measured or observed is always the sum quanta of composing. There then, as there is a continuous matter, continuous power does not exist in the universe means quanto energy quanta, or 3.5. The quanto is the minimum that the universe dispatched if we ask energy. Physical revolution that was implicit theory was not fully appreciated by Planck himself, among other things. Just state what came to be called the wave-particle duality, that is, the strange feature with light and electromagnetic waves sometimes behave as wave trains, and sometimes intangible as particles with a mass and a specific load, and something as the body and the spirit of things, to explain in language humanist. It's not a figure of speech. This dualistic behavior has been measured many times, and depends precisely how we want to see. To see it as particles exist a series of experiments, and others see it as waves. Based on Rutherford atom and the quanta of Planck, the Danish physicist Niels Bohr issued a new theory of the structure of the atom, which in his honor is known as atom Bohr. This theory first showed that electrons orbiting core around the model of Rutherford would finish fall against the core itself, because of the gravitational force exerted it. This could lead to a universal catastrophe, because nothing would exist otherwise. Bohr 1922. Bohr suggested that electrons were carriers of mechanical energy due to its rotational speed. It was possible to measure quanta, as any energy should be an integral multiple quanto. Thus, each electron would have minimal power in the core, and when gaining some energy, it would be possible to separate the core, and perhaps even jump to another electron shell. In any case, the transition of an electron from a higher to lower energy states produces a quantum of light, and vice versa. Pauli, 1940, with its Call exclusion principle, then set the concept of how many electrons could be by layer, and how his mechanics. Here, we should note that the importance of gaining or losing electrons is significant in nature. For example, in a simplified form, the basic gas, the hydrogen has a proton, plus, and a neutron, 0, at its core, while around it has one electron, dash. If hydrogen gains an electron, and happens to have two, it becomes another gas, helium, and in that conversion is issued an amount of energy that is the same as is similar to the hydrogen bomb, which is also similar to the sun and stars, nuclear fusion. In other words, the sun and stars are just large hydrogen bombs, gigantic factories converting hydrogen into helium. In contrast, if we would like to convert hydrogen-helium, we should make one of the electrons that orbit the nucleus of helium jump its orbit and disappear. This is not possible without providing some amount of energy, and the best way to achieve it is by bombarding one ejected electron atomic particle to another to deviate it from his path, nuclear fission. Thus, it is possible to convert other elements in accordance with the ancient tradition wanted alchemical, but the downside is indeed serious. The amount energy to be applied to convert any element to gold is much more expensive, even today, to acquire the same in any gold jewelry. Thus, in the same way that the study of the atom led to the conclusion that the material, the surface of a table, a wall, and all you can imagine, is not continuous, but it is an intricate network of atoms linked together by the so-called force-weak nuclear power itself, in all its manifestations, radiant, mechanical, etc., is not continuous, but the sum of amounts of quanta of energy. The uncertainty principle Heisenberg, 1958, had an enormous impact today, since it is mitigated by modern concepts. Scientists, who once had the physics of Newton, led French Laplace to ensure that the universe was absolutely deterministic. This happened in the early 19th century. Laplace held that since the universe has rigorous laws, and these know the state of the universe, these same laws would predict the future evolution of things. This thought was going a little further, by stating that these laws also exist for behavior human, and therefore ruled all future possibilities of man. These ideas had a surprising success that reaches our days, but now the word determinism is replaced by that of destiny. Everything is written, we cannot escape our destiny, the future is inflexible. This cancelled that to stroke the first and most important gift that we received from God, and that is none other than freedom. Freedom to live or die, freedom to love or hate, freedom to believe something or its opposite, etc. To which determinism answered with the technique of a posteriori, because once the man actually exercised his freedom by choosing something immediately answered part of your destiny, as the universal laws governed at the time of your choice are really elected for you. Human freedom, from this perspective, was reduced to mere illusion. Strong implications of the discoveries of Planck, Bohr, and many others not quoted in brevity. It was not fully appreciated until 1926, when the great German physicist Werner Heisenberg formulated his famous uncertainty principle. Heisenberg thought, correctly, that to predict the future of a particle was necessary to know the current speed and position, and to study the present time particle, that only one thing is essential. However, Heisenberg concluded an unthinkable difficulty. If quanta content in light waves hits the particle, we will see its position, but we cannot deduce its speed. On the contrary, we have no way of detecting the passage of the particle by a point and another separated from the first, and measuring its speed does not allow us to know nothing about its position in space at any given time. Heisenberg demonstrated that one cannot know both the position and velocity of a particle in the future. The implications of the work of Planck and Bohr had not been observed until Heisenberg enunciated his famous uncertainty principle, just as sure now that the implications of this principle has not yet been apprehended today all day, although there is much debate, and are the subject of intense controversy. The Heisenberg uncertainty principle is obvious to note that governs for both particles and for the whole universe, so it is not possible to predict future events, since it is not measurable even in the current state of play as necessary. The philosophical importance derived from the uncertainty principle has indirectly reached various disciplines. E.g. in anthropology, he was certain that when a researcher visiting such a primitive tribe, he observed behavior of those Indians. That's not quite correct, because the presence of an anthropologist modifies its behavior and so much more, as they are culturally different researcher and researched. Heisenberg, with S.C.H. Ardlinger and Dirac, formulated the called mechanical quantum, which is to redefine, since it is not possible to know both the speed and position of a particle, the so-called quantum state, which is a combination of both things at once. This does not lead to a single result, is not predicted for each observation event, but a number of results are given in place calculating possible probabilities each from the call wave function. A widely used example is the room where we are. For example, quantum mechanics can predict the millions of different situations in the room space can occupy each of the molecules of air there, and likely to be met. One of these positions is that all the air in the room could focus on one of the upper corners, and we suffocate from lack of oxygen. This, however, is highly unlikely, but certainly happened in the time elapsed since now and 46 billion years in the future. Einstein objected to the uncertainty principle, since according to his famous phrase, God does not play dice, meant that he hated the idea of the final decision on which would likely among trillions of them possible at any given time, you were to chance. However, until today, experimentation supports fully the Heisenberg uncertainty principle. Another interesting aspect of the theory of quantum mechanics is the confirmation of the wave-particle duality. Relative concatency with the Bohr theory of the atom comes to reinforce it. One of the most famous and curious thought experiments in the recent history of physics is the Schrodinger's cat, Leggett 1984. A cat is penned up in a steel chamber, along with the following device, which must be secured against direct interference by the cat. In a Geiger counter, there is a tiny bit of radioactive substance, so small that perhaps in the course of the hour one of the atoms decays, but also, with equal probability, perhaps none. If it happens, the counter tube discharges, and through a relay releases a hammer that shatters a small flask of hydrocyanic acid. If one has left this entire system to itself for an hour, one would say that the cat still lives if meanwhile no atom has decayed. The psi function of the entire system would express this by having in it the living and dead cat, pardon the expression, mixed or smeared out in equal parts. It is typical of these cases that an indeterminacy originally restricted to the atomic domain becomes transformed into macroscopic indeterminacy, which can then be resolved by direct observation. That prevents us from so naively accepting as valid a blurred model for representing reality. In itself, it would not embody anything unclear or contradictory. There is a difference between the shaky or out-of-focus photograph and the snapshot of clouds and fog banks. There is a 50% chance that each occurred, but some must have consummated that the cat lives or is dead. Quantum physics is not so simple, as it follows from this simple proposition. The so-called Copenhagen interpretation argues that there is a superposition of quantum states actually living/non-living cat, and it is absurd to wonder which of the two situations is the right, until a determined observer. This is the called function collapse wave. At that time the cat was alive or dead, but only at that moment. To be an observer, the universe would have decided. Of course, the experiment is theoretical, because it is not possible to completely isolate a showcase. Now some of the issues raised in this mental exercise, if present in the microscopic reality, include the one by the famous physicist David Bohm, and Halley 1984. He says the situation is not possible described, and that the cat is really dead or alive. To solve the problems of indeterminacy, he suggests a complex process of hidden variables that would eliminate conceptually. Finally, not worth remembering the interpretation Many Worlds of Everett III, 1983, according to which the universe would unfold into one with a dead cat and alive, in which case we would be only one, but also another without being aware of it. This assumption is highly questionable since imply a doubling of the universe in every quantum process, thereby dramatically increases the complexity at each instant. However, it is not entirely possible to banish for obvious reasons probative nature, and even, in recent years, this has been the subject of depth studies, as evidenced by the fact that it has been published in the journal Scientific American month of June 1994, a curious physical work known about. Until about 25 years ago, it was believed that the elementary particles of matter was the electrons, protons, and neutrons, as constituent core atom. But experiments conducted on those produced collisions of protons with protons, electrons, or protons, led to the conclusion that there were even more elementary particles in the matter. Indeed, the physics scientist Gell-Mann, 1964, received in that year the Nobel Prize for the discovery of these particles, which he called quarks. The study initiated by the quarks of Gell-Mann, 1964, set the next surprise in quantum physics. Moreover, as good citizens of the quantum world, protons, neutrons, and quarks behave incomprehensible. A proton, for example, is composed of 3 quarks, 2 up quarks, and 1 down quark. Generally, quarks cannot be linked in varying amounts 3. The resulting color of the sum of the 3 quarks must be always the white, i.e. the colors of them are mixed to be cancelled. Another feature is that the mass of the proton is less than the sum of the masses of the 3 quarks that comprise. Quarks, when bound into protons, neutrons, and other particles, they achieve such stability, for disintegrate and die by itself has not yet elapsed time precise since the universe exists for this to occur, and probably will not be in the future. However, when a quark is released in a collision between particles, it does not pass the half-life of a billionth of a second. Gell-Mann 1964. Another important concept in quantum theory is the concept of the spin. The spin is an essential feature of the particles and atomic subparticles, and a brief description is to indicate the number of turns that should give those to observe all their properties. The spin is what defines and creates the differences between material particles and virtual, or forces, particles. For each particle there is its antiparticle, as Dirac predicted, Cooper and Jennings 1986. This is particle with the same mass and opposite charge, including electric charge. For example, the antiparticle of the electron is the positively charged electron, or positron, which is produced naturally in certain types of radioactive decay. There are 4 fundamental forces in the universe, of which all others derive. These are the electromagnetic force, the force weak nuclear, strong nuclear force, and gravity. Its action is produced, it is believed theoretically, by the exchange of subparticles called respectively virtual photons, bosons, massive gluons, and gravitons. A grand unified theory is one that seeks to explain that these 4 forces are different manifestations of the same force, that is the same force that ruled in the moment of the Big Bang. George 1979. The greatest and only threat to ourselves is a loss of self. The death of our divinity, as we barrel through history with oceans of information, yet barely a drop of wisdom. We have to understand how we lost herself. The Earth's resonant frequency starts at 7.83 Hz and ends with the 7th harmonic at 43.2 Hz, correlating with the 7 chakras. Ultimately, the greatest discovery of our Earth, as its consciousness, a visible attribute of consciousness, is an energetic field that governs the shaping of organisms. Penrose and Hameroff 2011. Altered states of consciousness and transpersonal psychology. The human being experiences different altered states of consciousness. Consciousness can be altered in different ways. We find pathological states of consciousness, as in the case of severe depression, especially in the case of psychosis, states of consciousness, as deep hypnosis produced by hallucinogenic drugs like mescaline and LSD, and even altered states of consciousness that are common in the practice of yoga, and in the case of mystical ecstasy. It would be quite impossible to give a concrete and precise definition of the so-called altered states of consciousness, ASC. For many, it is an unclear term, too ambiguous. The scientific community itself is divided over the definition of their functions, location, objectivity, etc. However, even with the added constraints of language, we try to be as objective as possible, but, as everyone knows, as the general principles of quantum theory state, we must be aware that we can only know a part of the reality, that, in any case, will always be the reality of the observer. Traditionally, psychology described 2 states of consciousness, waking and sleep. However, the great psychologist William James, 1985, stated, in his time, "I am sure that, between the 2 extreme states of consciousness, as we know, there are many other states that do not have to be pathological." These were prophetic words indeed, because now we have identified many of these states, and many of them are beneficial to humans. Stanley Krippner, 2000, defined ASC as mental states that can be recognized by an objective observer other than the individual, who experiences it as differences in mental functions, the normal state of the individual, the alertness, and the waking. In fact, 20 states have been provisionally identified, with considerable overlap, as worthy of further study. ASC may be spontaneous or caused by many different methods. Among them we can highlight hypnosis, meditation, psychedelic drugs intake, hearing some music, colors, or perfumes, sensory isolation, electronic stimulation of the brain by a brain synchroenergizer, Alsebard, 2000, etc. In general terms, they can be defined as mental states likely to be recognized by an individual or an objective observer of the individual as different as it relates to normal psychological functions of the individual alert. Of all the ASC, the best known and widespread is the meditation practice that is currently carried out in universities, colleges, schools, etc. Already in the era of the caverns, individuals realized that focusing on a single stimulus, sounds, breathing, etc., a special type of consciousness is generated. Hart and Kamiya, 1978, observed that in the subjects who practiced meditation, the alpha activity was more pronounced in the frontal regions and top of the head, because normally these wave trains are more common to find in the occipital region. Another known way of inducing ASC is with neurological rhythmical stimulation of the brain. This is with a repetitive quality of sensory stimuli that begins to generate a synchronous pattern of brain waves that is known as the Monroe effect. Monroe, 1982. Ornstein, 1973, tells us of a similar phenomenon that is known as the Ganzfeld effect, which is caused by looking at a white screen, or by placing on the eyes two devices similar to half balls of the type used in the ping-pong game, which, after about 20 minutes, the subject blocks his or her sense of sight, while an electroencephalogram, EEG, detects an increase in frontal alpha waves. Through these and similar studies, it has been possible to establish that meditation increases the blood flow and causes decrease in oxygen consumption, both effects due to a profound change in metabolism. Also, it increases the electrical resistance of the skin, giving an index of the state of relaxation of the subject. For information only, we can point out that after several hours of sleep, the electrical resistance of the skin arrives doubled, while after a few minutes of meditation is reached, it quadruples its value. Hafner, 1982. Meditation also produces a rapid reduction of blood lac level, a product of the cell's metabolism, possibly because it is combined with calcium, which is essential for the transmission through the nervous system. In fact, a high level of blood lac is associated with panic disorder. Hafner, 1982. Our brains mathematically construct concrete images by interpreting frequencies from another dimension, a realm of primary reality, significant, scheduled, and that transcends time and space reality. In this sense, the brain can be described as a hologram interpreting a holographic universe, and in such a context the ASC may be due to a literal harmonization with the invisible matrix that generates concrete reality. King, 2012. In this scheme, if events come in a holographic representation of frequencies that transcend space and time, they do not have to be communicable, as they are potentially simultaneous and available everywhere. David Bohm, 1990, described that the universe is a hologram that would seem to be a range of frequencies that give the illusion of immediate and tangible apparently creation. The most harmonious and coherent states of consciousness come into harmony with this primary reality. David Bohm, 1990, affirms that whatever is manifested by nature has n dimensions, is timeless, and cannot be handled in any way. Abraham Maslow, 1969, known psychologist in transpersonal psychology, through its observations concluded that the climax experience involves an individual merger of facts and values and conflict resolution, loss of anxiety, the discovery of the true self, a sense of unit, attachment, generosity, happiness, and love. Stanislav Grof, one of the founders of transpersonal psychology, is a psychiatrist of Czech origin who worked most of his career in the United States. He was professor of psychiatry at Johns Hopkins, and his last work was at the S. Allen Institute and the Center of Transpersonal Psychology for many years. Grof has studied the effect of LSD in a particularly extensive and profound way. In the 60s he directed about 3,000 sessions with the drug and had access to about 2,000 case histories of other cases that he had not spoken personally. Then, as the ban on held LSD in the United States, he started practicing holotropic therapy, with which can also be used to induce a similar altered state of consciousness. Holotropic therapy has been practiced by Grof, 1994, along with his wife Christina, as a way to produce an altered state of consciousness without drugs. This is done with hyperventilation, making an individual to take a deep and rapid breath for several minutes. Grof, with this technique, caused a pulmonary hyperventilation This is also accompanied by music and some verbal guidance from who leads the session. The subject remains lying down, eyes closed, in order to facilitate the alteration of consciousness. This technique produces a decrease of carbon dioxide in the blood, which must also have a level, neither too high nor too low. This sharp decline in the level of carbon dioxide in turn causes a neurological crisis, and through the brain acts in a similar way to a drug. This causes a crisis that leads to an altered state of consciousness, and allows the psychologist to study the consciousness of the individual from that new state. Stanislav Grof, 1994, uses the experiential healing power of this new state of consciousness. Ludwig, 1966, defines an altered state of consciousness as any mental state, for various maneuvers of physiological, psychological or pharmacological agents, which can be recognized subjectively by the same, or an objective observer of the individual person induced, as representing a sufficient deviation in the subjective experience or psychological functioning of certain general rules for that individual during alert awareness. This deviation can be sufficiently represented by a greater concern, unusual with internal sensations or mental processes, changes in the formal characteristics of thought, and the deterioration of the test of reality to varying degrees. The cognitive approach to altered states of consciousness has revealed that similar features that are characteristic of many altered states of consciousness, including alterations in thinking, sense of disturbed weather, loss of control, change in emotional expression, change of body image, perceptual distortions, change in the meaning or importance, sense of the ineffable, and feelings of rejuvenation. Ludwig, 1972. By applying the disruptive force requirement for the basic state of consciousness, either through some physiological action, such as drugs or deployment of attention and meditation, the current organization of cognitive subsystems is destabilized until a new force patterns, such as mental setting, expectations, drug effects, is applied to shape the subsystems in a whole new system, the production of a new discrete state of consciousness with its own stabilization processes. Cognitive awareness approach has helped differentiate transpersonal psychologists. Grade's waking state of consciousness. Awareness, for example, is not one homogeneous thing, but varies and changes as the colors of the rainbow. It is possible to stratify states ordered to raise awareness of alert and focused relaxed concentration, and spread the cosmic consciousness. A range of altered states of consciousness have been identified as drug-induced states: hypnosis, biofeedback, daydreaming, night dreaming, sensory deprivation, and paranormal experiences. With each state consisting of many levels and functions, in each region or area of consciousness, individuals are able to process different types of information at different levels of control. Goldman and Davidson, 1979, Ornstein, 1972. Transpersonal psychologists tend to see the experiences of mystical union, enlightenment, nirvana, and related experiences as natural and beneficial non-ordinary states of consciousness that may be subject to effects of state-dependent learning. The idea that the experience of the sacred can be interpreted as altered states of consciousness arose from the observation of twice that psychedelic drugs have been used through the centuries and cultures to induce religious experiences, and b. reports from some drug experiences are phenomenologically, descriptively, or experiential. Indistinguishable from accounts of natural mystical experiences. Dublin, 1991, Greenspan and Bakalar, 1997, Smith, 1964. Transpersonal psychologist Charles T. Dart has examined the altered states of consciousness from a cognitive perspective in terms of changes in the configuration and operation of the underlying mental processes. Dart, 1971, 1976, 1983, 1992. A state of consciousness involves cognitive functioning following subsystems: exteroceptors receive sensory information, interoceptors, kinesthetic receives input processing, working memory, the subconscious processes, sense of identity, evaluation, and decision-making, emotions, space/time sense, long-term memory, the motor output, behavior, plus latent functions. These 10 subsystems, more possible latent functions, define any discrete state of consciousness. The particular configuration of the subsystems in a given time is shaped and limited by the deployment of attention, the body's energies, characteristics of the structures themselves, and the particular social and cultural environments in which they operate. Groff, 1988, suggested that the term altered states of consciousness cover transpersonal experiences. However, there are certain types of altered states of consciousness that do not meet the criteria for being transpersonal, involving an expansion or extension of consciousness beyond the limits of the usual and limitations time and space. For example, a living and complex childhood memory occurs in an altered state of consciousness, e.g., hypnosis or psychedelic sessions, but do not meet the criteria for being transpersonal. The cultural context of the 1960s and 1970s provided fertile ground for the emergence of transpersonal studies as an independent field of study in psychology. The infusion of ideas Eastern contemplative traditions of Zen, Advaita, Vedanta, and Taoism, along with the institutionalization of the humanist revolution in academic psychology, and the growing interest in consciousness and altered states of consciousness that are triggered by the widespread use of psychedelics, paved the way for the birth of transpersonal psychology movement in California in the late 1960s. Farrer, 2002. Since the 1970s, transpersonal psychology, as the humanist movement that preceded it, has been divided into 3 different groups. The first group, represented by the ideas of Groff, 1988, that believes that transcendence can only occur in the presence of an altered state of consciousness. This group produces conceptual models of non-ordinary states of consciousness. The second group, led by Wilber, 1975, include those trying to assign internal states of consciousness and identify with the monistic and perennial philosophy of Aldous Huxley. Wilber believes that all expressions of the highest state of consciousness in each tradition are the same as the psychopathic conditions occurring at the bottom, the normal waking reality in the middle, and meditative states of higher consciousness in the top. The third and, by far the largest segment of the transpersonal movement has no identifiable bearer. It sees the self as getting up and go to work in the morning. The higher consciousness is sweeping the floor, washing dishes, and raking leaves. The lightning is doing everything we are supposed to be doing at this minute. There is a preconceived thing, is not an altered state of consciousness, it is simply the deep philosophy, which is to be found most clearly in the mundane. Taylor, 1999. Altered states of consciousness answer the question, who we really are. The answer to this question is that we are a part of God, and that humans are spiritual beings having human experiences that somehow reveal the direction of our full identity of our cosmic status. Neuro and bioenergy technologies. Interest in new technological devices has grown strongly since the release of 1986's classic text of Michael Hutchison Megabrain. 1986. Besides neurotechnological machines, the industry has developed a range of related devices including peripheral tapes, subliminal tapes, hypnoperipheral processing, sound meditation devices, and altered state induction software programs for personal computers, etc. It seems like neurotechnology combined with contemporary psychology may seem to be revolutionary, but its roots are much older, as humanity has made many attempts in the past to involve consciousness with technology. The flashing LEDs in a light and sound machine can be traced back to the old practice of starting a fire in order to induce trance. Sound recordings of brain entrainment undoubtedly have their roots in the ritual singing and shamanic use of wind instruments. This current era of neurotechnology was born from the experiments made in biofeedback that resulted in the work of some researchers of consciousness as Masters and Houston, 1966, that created the AV, an abbreviation of audio-visual environment, that is one of the first electronic brain entrainment devices. The AV was the first device to use visual and auditory stimuli as a means of altering consciousness. Not much different than many of audio-visual devices of today, the AV consisted of a wraparound screen and headphones to bomb the sense in these two stimuli. these signals generated by app devices and detectable by electroencephalogram, EEG, tests at specific frequency ranges, seem to vary from one state of consciousness to another for their users. The products of neurotechnology appear to make possible to tune the brain to these different alternating frequencies and in turn achieve new psychological states. When you tune into these frequencies at a lower pace, our thought processes and central nervous system are altered, causing the brain to fall into a deep level of activity. In addition, when one is tuned to a frequency faster and a higher range, the wave activity can have a highly stimulating effect on the brain. Altered states of consciousness have been used as a therapy for modern psychological paradigms as transpersonal psychology, Valverde, 2015. Although there are several techniques such as holotropic breathing used to induce these altered states of consciousness, neurotechnology offers an easier-to-control alternative to the transpersonal therapies. The area called neuro includes all types of technology that in it contributes to the advancement of knowledge related to the brain. Despite that neurotechnology is relatively old, its most significant advances occurred in the last 30 years. The 90s were even proclaimed by the U.S. government American as the decade of the brain. Much of the responsibility for this development exacerbated is due to the advent and popularization of brain imaging techniques, including MRI, CT, PET, positron emission tomography, among others. With technological advances, some of these techniques at first provided only structural information from the brain, but now it allows us to study the brain dynamics. Experimentation and published research on the altering of brain activity has been going on for decades. A vast amount of applicable data has been collected by researchers and scientists concerning the manipulation and influencing of brain waves and states of consciousness. One effect discovered by German scientists in the 1930s is called the Ganz field effect, Hyman 1985. It is an effect in which the eyes are exposed to a totally uniform visual field, with no edges, color changes, or movement. This effect can be achieved by looking up at the sky on a clear, cloudless day, or with very specially constructed illuminated glasses. It affects the circuitry in the brain, which normally is constantly scanning the visual field for edges and movement. The eye responds primarily to changes, and with visual sensations shut off and the brain finding absolutely nothing, the subject cannot tell if his eyes are open or closed. This is an example of an altered state of consciousness resulting from the shift in brain waves to the theta state. The effects of flickering light stimulation have been known for centuries. Ancient shamans used flickering lights to achieve the trance state, a key component in the development of the spiritual practices of a wide variety of ancient cultures. In the literature of the Common Era, Ptolemy noted around 280 that the flickering of sunlight seen through the spokes of a spinning wheel could cause patterns and colors to appear to the observer, producing a feeling of lightheadedness and euphoria. The onset of modern times, 1940s and 50s, brought the research of neuroscientist W. Gray Walter, and Walter 1949. Walter used a strobe light to create flickering light stimulation, noting that the brain wave pattern of the cortex, just the area associated with vision, was changed. Ever since the adrenaline rush brought about by dancing around the tribal fire, the intent of scientists, researchers, and ancient religious practitioners has been to create relaxation and altered states by affecting the vibrational frequency of the brain waves. The use of technology is a modern-day attempt to create desired changes in the brain's functioning, bringing about states of well-being and health. Robert Monroe, one of the most prominent people in neurotechnology, in particular in the field of sound with neurological efficiency, devised the method hemisync, synchronization, of the cerebral hemispheres by means of sounds. Like glass resonates when a pure tone is emitted, the brain resonates when receives certain frequencies of waves, being synchronized with these. Similar to the previous with the flashes of light, effect is known as FFR, frequency following response, responsive frequency tracking. Machines created based on FFR began to be popular. The typical machine based on the principle of Monroe using stereo headphones that are used are separately send sound to each ear signals, for example 2 sines of 300 and 304 Hz. In one ear will be heard only 300 Hz signal, and the other only 304, but since the sounds are combined in the brain, this will hear a third signal of 4 Hz, which is the difference between the two sound impulses. This third sign is not an audible sound, but an electrical signal that can only be created by the cerebral hemispheres acting in unison, and may go unnoticed, producing, as a result, the two hemispheres are focused simultaneously on the same state of consciousness, increasing and brain power. The Monroe Institute was created based on the principles of Monroe. This institute was founded by Robert A. Monroe, who began studying the effects of sound on accelerated learning. In the 50s, the work is the result of thousands of hours of laboratory sessions. Participants listen voluntarily specific combinations and sequences of sound patterns, and simultaneously are reporting their experiences, while electronic instruments measure the effects on the activity of their brain waves. W. Gray Walter, 1964. Conducting experiments in which strobe devices used to send rhythmic flashes of light in the eyes, watched amazed that the flickering light could alter the activity of the entire cerebral cortex, rather than exclusively associated areas with vision. The subjective experiences of those who received the flashes were even more curious, reported seeing lights, like comets, ultra-fantastic colors, color mental. Moreover, Walter discovered that certain visual stimuli of a certain frequency could cause the brain to respond quickly adjusted to the same frequency of the stimulus it received. In 1982, a psychiatrist in Gorgeous created a machine called Brainwave Synchronized Energized, patented and sold by his company, Neurotechnology Inc., which applies the latest technology in the first device designed optical acoustic stimulation. This is able to promote, as its inventor claimed, an increase in the capabilities and functions of the human mind, unleashed a wave of unprecedented research and experimentation, catalyzed by M. Hutchinson, 1986, through his famous book Mega Brain, that is being developed in and outside universities around the world. Studies on this type of equipment is underway in North American universities, in areas including education and training, substance abuse, gerontology, pharmacology, and physiology, as well as pain reduction. In Europe, at the University of Vienna, it has created a special subject for further study of these devices. The neurological investigations in the last 15 years have shown that our cerebral hemispheres work independently. Each hemisphere collects the same information that its sensors, eyes, ears, taste, touch, smell, and process differently. Our scheme of thought is influenced by the predominance of left hemisphere, logical and analytical thinking. Right hemisphere, creative thinking, visualization, and which carries out holistic synthesis. On the back of the brain is where the intuitive thought, subconscious, obviously use one of the two hemispheres or either of the brain regions severely limits our abilities. The optimal functioning of our brain is given by the synchronization of the two hemispheres. By left, right, and front-back alternating stimulation occurs almost simultaneously, an issue of brain wave amplitude and frequency identical. It is that how you might think with our whole brain. Neurotechnology are typically used for process brainwave entrainment, to tune brain waves and arrange brain wave. With these machines, you may experience theta waves, alpha, delta, or including combinations of ranges using frequencies layer that mix several ranges brainwave in a brainwave pattern synergistic as pattern brainwave. Hemisync is a patented process sound pulses to create the same electric waves and frequency and amplitude simultaneously in both hemispheres of the brain for specific purposes. Our brains have a hemisphere left and right. The left brain is linear, logical, practical, and time-oriented. The right hemisphere seems to be much more nonlinear, abstract, creative, holistic, and not logic. We tend to use one hemisphere at a time, or better said, will favor hemispheres particular in terms of what we are doing. An accountant probably uses less of his right hemisphere than an artist would during the course of their workday. If the person is doing math, the staff would be using more of your left hand. If the person is going to paint a picture, the person would have the activity hemispheric more right. Both hemispheres are constantly interacting, and both can be in use simultaneously. By merging both hemispheres, a person is allowed to work together, and with this the person can increase his or her ability mental, and improve his or her performance cognitive in general. Basically, it's like having a computer processor faster, able to work at faster speeds. The greater integration creates better performance. The mind machines that help the brain synchronizes naturally to balance hemispheric activity, and adjusts the activity of brain waves to match the carrier frequencies embedded brain waves. This hemispheric coherence-induced audio produces an optimal state of comprehensive synergy of the entire brain. These hemispheres are connected by the corpus callosum. It serves as a conduit or a bridge between both sides. This bridge literally be exercised and strengthened until it is physically larger and more capable of transmitting data, ideas, and feedback between the hemispheres. The advance occurs when you use this principle to synchronize our brainwave frequencies chosen with the help of specific mental machines. We can do this easily by using technology binaural beat audio and ringtones monophonic. This phenomenon is called trailing phenomenon. The scientific principle of drag can be used to resonate or synchronize your brain to tune specific frequencies. The drive is quite simple. If you have two tuning forks of the same pitch, if you strike one and hold it near the other, which both resonate at the same frequency. Given this fact and the fact that our brains function as a resonating chamber, oscillating pulses and patterns of neural excitation ripple through our brains like endless waves on a pond of subtle dynamic electric field. The creation process frequency binaural beat brainwave entrainment is very simple to explain. First, you create two audio tones, two frequencies slightly different, i.e. 100 Hz and 107 Hz. When playing a tone in the ear left and the other tone in his right ear, the brain reacts to the stimulus audio by resonance brain activity to the difference between these two tones. His brain waves adjust to match this frequency differential. For example, if you play a frequency of 100 Hz in the ear and left 107 Hz in the right ear, your brain tuned the 7 Hz differential. 107 Hz, 100 Hz equals 7 Hz. This frequency tracking response makes your brain to resonate at 7 Hz frequency falls within the range of brain waves theta. This guides psychoacoustic state-of-the-art can create phenomenal results. The electrical activity of neurons is changing patterns of electrical potential through all cell membranes. Each cell generates in the membrane potential can be detected in about 1 micrometer of the cell, but large sets of brain cells that can work in harmony to generate potential of few microvolts that can be detected through the skull and scalp using electrodes. The variation of the electrical potential around the scalp is the basis of operation of the electroencephalogram. This method of recording the electrical activity of the brain, digitized maps, produces the electrical activity of brain. The state in which the two hemispheres are synchronized, that is, showing similar activity in both hemispheres, sometimes known as whole brain, naturally occurring randomly for short periods. Stimulation through the differential tone makes it possible to sustain this state for longer periods. EEG based on data collected in the laboratory of Gateway Institute, it is clear that after a brief period of use of frequencies of hemisync, it can be demonstrated the benefits of the technology without the use of external sources. The hemisync process has already been tested and implemented in many ways for sleep better, reduce tension or stress, control pain, accelerate learning, study and concentration, and enhance creativity, find solutions to problems. Light and sound machines have the purpose to create a relaxed state through the use of sound and light stimulation. It was discovered in the 1930s that repetitive light stimulation, strobing, caused brain waves to follow and pulse at the same frequency. Walter 1949. This discovery had profound implications for the human condition, giving rise to an entire industry that explores the possibilities in using outside stimulation to provide a functioning aid to the workings of the brain. The devices on the market today are set at predetermined frequencies of 1 to 40 Hz. The user is then free to experiment on just how these vibrational frequencies influence their effect on the mind. Most users report patterns of colors that pulse in sync with the frequency of the beats. The patterns are often quite psychedelic and geometrical. Light and sound machines are often used for meditation assistance or to aid the learning process. The technologies are referred to as audio-visual stimulation systems, light and sound machines, or mind machines. Varying patterns of light and sound are used to create different states of awareness, attention, relaxation, creativity, and receptivity to information. Most systems are controlled by a microprocessor. The sound and music sometimes comes on a CD, with the frequency patterns embedded in the music. A typical system is made up of 3 components: a light/sound synthesizer, stereo headphones, and stimulation glasses with pulsating lights. A carefully composed sequence of rhythmic light and sound patterns direct the stimulation synthesis, creating light and/or sound sessions for the desired effect. Some systems connect to your music CD player or have one built in. The process employs a technology called an audio strobe system, which creates inaudible, high-frequency beats that drive a light/sound system. Other systems have computer interface capabilities that allow the user to vary the tone, frequency, pitch, and other parameters to tailor the program to individual needs. Some metaphysical technology companies have downloadable programs that allow for even more growth, variety, and individual tailoring. A few make a point of offering customer service, where the company provides you with specifics that are designed to individual needs. 1995. The light and sound systems are designed to blank out the visual and auditory stimulation that the mind generally receives and replaces it with very simple, rhythmic stimulation. Some light systems come with glasses that block certain colors so that the brain focuses on others to create the desired stimulation. The basic rhythms of light and sound cause the mental processes to change in response. Thus, the rate of brain waves adjusts to the desired vibrational rate. Another technology designed to create specific body changes is biofeedback. Biofeedback is a non-invasive, painless, non-pharmaceutical method of teaching you to become aware of your body processes and help you learn to change them. Electrodes are placed on the skin and feed information into a small box attached to your computer via a serial board. The equipment feeds information back to you about your body. The feedback is usually auditory, a soft beep. And, by concentrating on this sound, the user can focus on specific bodily processes and learn to relax in very specific ways. The process is designed to provide the individual with an ongoing progress report as to how their body is responding to their own internal controls. In this way, one can learn to change heart rate, skin temperature, muscle tension, and certain brain wave patterns. Turnbull and Ritvo, 1992. Biofeedback information is used to teach the patient what are the brain regions responsible for a certain behavior and thus be able to learn to control these areas and monitor the progress of the training. The difference between the two technologies is that light and sound machines provide direct stimulation that affects the rate of brain waves, whereas biofeedback places the impetus on the individual to control their body's processes themselves. The goal of biofeedback is to train oneself to respond to intrinsic cues, which contrasts to the light-sound stimulation machine's purpose of matching one's brain frequencies to outside stimulation. Neurotechnology is for healing and affecting one's mental and physical state in a positive way. However, in order to best apply the technologies to one's personal circumstances, diagnostic processes may be needed in regards to one's individual circumstances. One such diagnostic tool is called Kirlian photography. This process was discovered in 1939 when Simeon Kirlian, 1973, found that if a living object on a photographic plate is subjected to a high-voltage electric field, an image is created on that plate. The image looks like a colored halo or coronal discharge. This process captures what the spiritual community refers to as the aura, and the scientific community calls the Meissner field. This field is the area of gas ionization that is produced when electricity enters a living object. The image of the moisture is transferred from the subject to the emulsion surface of the photographic film. The field is visible to the photographic process because of the exchange of photons or light particles which takes place as our cells communicate through the chemical process with each other and with the surrounding environment. The light particles the body produces carry information in the same way that fiber optics carry information from one point to the next. The color and densities that appear on the photo will vary due to the variances of energy output as a result of the different quantities and balances of acids and alkalis the body gives off as it attempts to optimize its chemical processes. The appearance of this gas ionization process on film varies in ways that are consistent. Thus, diagnosis of one's chemical balance can be inferred from the colors and densities that appear on the film. Therefore, a good interpreter can detect specific energy imbalances from the color variances in the field surrounding the image of the body. Pulsed electromagnetic fields which induce measurable electric fields have been demonstrated to be effective for treating slow-healing fractures, and have shown promise for a number of other conditions. This has opened up a huge effort to market a wide variety of magnetic products to assist with the healing process. A whole range of products is available for what is referred to as magnetic therapy. Small spot magnets can be used at the point of pain on the body. There are wraps, belts, and pads which are held on the body in some fashion. In addition, there are matte wrist pads that claim to balance the body's energies while one sleeps. Various types of jewelry incorporate magnets into their design, including a wide variety of bracelets and necklaces. Many magnetic necklaces, bracelets, and earrings are formed from silver and gold-rich magnetic alloys and are promoted as both fashionable and therapeutic. One catalog claims that magnetic earrings stimulate nerve endings that are associated with head and neck pain, and magnetic bracelets act upon the body's energy field and correct energy imbalances brought by electromagnetic contamination or atmospheric changes. Valbona, C. and Richards 1999. The broadest explanation of the use of magnets in treating physical ailments was presented by Dr. Kyoichi Nakagawa of Japan, Nakagawa, 1976. Dr. Nakagawa claims that many of our modern ills result from magnetic field deficiency syndrome. The Earth's magnetic field is known to have decreased about 6% since 1830, and indirect evidence suggests that it may have decreased as much as 30% over the last millennium. He argues that magnetic therapy simply provides some of the magnetic field that the Earth has lost. Magnetic therapy is also prominent in the treatment of thoroughbred race horses. The incentive to try alternative medicine to supplement mainstream veterinary treatment is considerable. An injured racehorse represents potential loss of a substantial investment. Magnetic pads, magnetic blankets, magnetic hoof pads, and more are used for a variety of leg problems. All get ringing endorsements from many horse trainers, and even some veterinarians. One marketer of magnetic products for humans reports that he first became convinced of their effectiveness when he used them on his llama. Some argue that the placebo effect might be taking place in these circumstances, but the psychological aspects of the healing treatments are obviously not happening with the animal. However, magnet therapy enthusiasts forget that it may influence the human, who is interpreting the effect of magnetic therapy on the animal. Clinical studies report between 75 to 85% of patients experience relief using magnetic therapy. Whether or not the placebo effect is taking place is always part of the debate. One point of contention in the argument is that the magnetic back braces used by many senior golfers may help ease their back pains through providing mechanical support, through localized warming, and through constant reminder to the aging athletes that they are no longer young and should not overexert their muscles. All these effects are helpful with or without magnets. One British study of pulsed field bone growth stimulators, which were approved decades ago by the FDA, found that they were equally successful when the devices were not activated. Barker 1984. It concluded that their effectiveness resulted from the enforced inactivity associated with their use rather than from the pulsed magnetic fields. The logical conclusion is that with circulation increased, the body's natural healing mechanism can work more efficiently. Some doctors believe that the magnetic field affects the iron component of blood, hemoglobin, thereby increasing circulation to the area where magnets are applied. Another theory is that the magnetic field energizes and oxygenates the white corpuscles in the bloodstream, and these white corpuscles are nature's healing agents. In this regard, the charged ions increase the blood flow, which provides increased oxygenation to the blood. This increased oxygenation is the prevalent factor to enhancing your body's natural healing powers, and the results are less pain, decreased inflammation, and the possibility of increased energy levels. Other specialists believe that, since nervous signals travel via tiny electromagnetic charges, an electromagnetic field may actually tune out false signals. The actual pain relief mechanism of magnetic energy may never be truly understood, since it operates within the tissues at such a microscopic level. What is clear, however, is that belief is necessary for effective healing. Studies of magnetic therapy practices and results are more common in Eastern Europe and Asia, where there is less access to pharmaceutical drugs. There is evidence that magnetic therapy does improve circulation and oxygenation in the bloodstream, and thus it would serve the purpose of facilitating healing for areas of the body recovering from injury or weakened by age or disease. One property of magnetic energy is that it has no measurable mass. This is also true for another kind of energy relevant to this course, orgone energy. Orgone energy was objectified and scientifically demonstrated by Dr. Wilhelm Reich, 1951. Reich built on Freud's early work, which strongly suggested that emotions and sexuality were expressions of a tangible energetic something. It was Reich who provided the clearest evidence that the Freudian libido was a real energy discharged during emotional expression and sexual orgasm. Reich discovered that this same discharging energy was present in a single cell, which apparently caused him to question whether that energy could be collected and harnessed. In 1940, Reich discovered a way to accumulate that energy and labeled it orgone energy. His work was not taken seriously at the time. There was no social context providing an atmosphere of acceptance for the idea of energy from repressed sexuality. However, a simple internet search reveals 23 published articles on the treatment of a wide variety of ailments, from cancer to rheumatoid arthritis, by the application of orgone energy. However, despite being used to treat specific ailments since at least 1971, there are numerous qualifiers in the dialogue on its applications. The point is frequently presented that science and society will have to go through some significant changes before its use will be accepted by the general public. Orgone energy is the primordial life energy, the fundamental creative force long known to people who are in touch with nature. Perceived as chi by acupuncturists, orgone energy is accumulated naturally in biological organisms by food, water, breathing, and through the skin. In 1940, Reich discovered a way to collect or accumulate orgone energy from the atmosphere. Reich's research revealed that energy is attracted to and absorbed by organic substances, but is attracted to and instantly re-radiated by metallic substances. He developed a special enclosure resulting from his experiments with the Faraday cage, a device built in 1836 by Michael Faraday to exclude energy. Reich's accumulator was made from layers of organic materials which absorb and hold the energy, and inorganic materials which attract and then rapidly repel orgone energy. He found that the inside of a metal-lined enclosure that is layered with organic and inorganic materials contained a higher concentration of orgone energy, which was detectable by a higher temperature reading inside the accumulator. Reich's device allowed him to isolate orgone radiation from its environment and then accumulate the energy within his device. Orgone radiation is not foreign to the body. The orgone energy in the atmosphere is just another form of the same orgone energy within the human body. The accumulator concentrates that energy and helps the body to help itself. Reich discovered that the energy moves in the direction of a magnetic field. Thus, when a person with their own energy field comes into contact with an accumulating device, the two fields may contact and excite each other. This creates a stronger excitation called lumination. This strong organotic charge has been found to be very beneficial to living systems. It may help to strengthen the immune system, improve circulation, and raise one's energy level. Investigations have shown that contact with energy from the accumulator stimulates the body's parasympathetic nervous system, inducing relaxation and a feeling of expansion. Modern research has found ways to manipulate and focus the energy, thus resulting in applications to the medical field. The motion is a pulsating expansion and contraction, and the flow normally along a curved path. Inside an accumulator, the energy is emitted as a spinning, pulsating wave. A wide range of devices, and even blankets, are available on the market that makes use of this technology. Another use of technology that has its roots in Asia is the adaptation of modern technology to the ancient art of acupuncture. Electroacupuncture is the application of a pulsating electrical current to acupuncture needles as a means of stimulating the acupoints. The acupoints connect the individual's body to the universal, cosmic energy that connects us all. The stimulation of these points has been an ancient healing tradition that reaches back through the millennia. In 1934, according to Saputidormananda, 2003, the director of the Institute for Traditional Medicine in Portland, Oregon, Chinese healers added electronic stimulus to the process as an extension of hand manipulation of the acupuncture needles. The process is described, though only briefly, in most comprehensive texts of acupuncture. The procedure for electroacupuncture is to insert the acupuncture needle as would normally be done, attain the QI reaction by hand manipulation, and then attach an electrode to the needle to provide continued stimulation. The idea was to help ensure that the practitioner, who may otherwise pause due to fatigue, gives the patient the amount of stimulation needed. It was also thought that electroacupuncture could produce a stronger stimulation without causing tissue damage associated with the twirling and thrusting of a needle. The stronger stimulus provided by the electronic current is better for treating more difficult cases of paralysis. Positive results have also been seen from treating patients with the chronic pain and spasms associated with neurological diseases. The application of modern-day electronic technology to an ancient healing art was developed to reduce total treatment time by providing a specific continued stimulus. The assumption was that it would be easier to control the frequency of the stimulus and the amount of stimulus than with hand manipulation of the needles. An added benefit was that it would free the practitioner to attend to other patients. However, the subsequent inattention to the patient receiving the electroacupuncture limits the opportunities to respond to changes that are taking place during treatment. In addition, the literature cautions against using the technique on patients with serious cardiac diseases. It is generally recommended to avoid placing electrodes near the heart, as the heart can respond adversely to electrical impulses. Another use of electrical impulses in the healing arts is cranial electrostimulation machines, Gialula and Kirsch 2005. The use of these machines involves placing sensors under the ears to send a minute electrical impulse. A slight tingling sensation on the skin is felt. The stimulation has the effect of tricking the brain into releasing the body chemical serotonin. Serotonin is a neurotransmitter that plays an important role in the biochemistry of depression, migraine headaches, bipolar disorders, and anxiety. There is also evidence that its presence or absence in the body influences sexuality and the appetite. The serotonin release can help relieve anxiety, tension, and the feeling of being on edge. There are portable versions of this machine, powered by a 9-volt battery, that are small enough to put in a pocket. The sensors are placed on the neck, below the ears, and can be used while walking or using the computer. They are designed to be used once a day in response to feelings of anxiety. It generally provides adjustments to the body chemistry and the ensuing relief from anxiety within 5 to 10 minutes. Another device in the category of neurotechnology facilitates lucid dreaming. Lucid dreaming is being aware of the fact that you are dreaming while you are doing so. This allows the dreamer to gain insight into the purpose and symbolic meanings behind the dream, thus facilitating their analysis and the ensuing psychological healing process. The technology for this process was developed by Stephen LaBerge, Ph.D., 1990, during 20 years of research at Stanford University. Dr. LaBerge developed a device called the Nova Dreamer, a mask-like device that detects the time that one is in REM sleep, the state of rapid eye movement that one experiences when dreaming. The device gives cues, such as flashing lights or specific sounds, that remind one to realize he or she is dreaming. In other words, one wakes up while still in the dream. The purpose is to give the dreamer detachment from the dreaming process during the course of the dream. This provides the impetus for the analytical process of dream interpretation to take place during the course of the dream. Users have reported that having lucid dreams have allowed them to make spontaneous choices that enable them to learn from, and even guide, the dream to constructive ends. Anecdotal evidence of these choices includes suddenly deciding to fly away from situations, empowering the dreamer to feel safer and have more free choice. There are also reports of incidents of making an old friend appear and talking to that person about consequential matters or resolving conflicts. Dreamers report being able to feel textures, hear sounds, and smell odors in the dreamscape. The users reported that these sensations were as real as any in the physical world, and they were able to make conscious decisions and choices. The entire process of lucid dreaming gives the spiritual sojourner tools and techniques developed deep within the psyche to explore and use their dreams for self-discovery, creativity, fantasy fulfillment, emotional healing, and profound spiritual insights. Full-spectrum lighting. Another simple use of technology is the use of full-spectrum lighting. Veitch, et al. 1991. Full-spectrum lighting is a process that uses specifically designed lighting fixtures that mimic the full spectrum of colors provided by our sun's rays. The purpose is to treat seasonal affective disorder, a psychological malady that is brought on by the deprivation of light. This is generally a result of the changing of summer, with its bright sunshiny days, to the fall season, with its shorter and darker daytime periods. The onset of this change can result in depression and lack of energy. Veitch, et al. 1991. The use of full-spectrum lighting fixtures allows for the same kind of light energy that the sun offers. The ultimate achievement so far in modern-day development of neurotechnology is the HearMeSync device, or Holistic Sensory Response Audio. In 1956, Robert A. Monroe founded the Monroe Institute to study the effects of various sound patterns on human consciousness, including the feasibility of learning during sleep. Monroe was a highly successful businessman, the owner of several radio and television stations. In 1958, he began to have out-of-body experiences, in which, while relaxing or attempting to fall asleep at night, he found himself hovering above his body. At the time, he thought he was having some kind of health problem, but was reticent to discuss it openly for fear it would interfere with his dealings with a very conservative business community. Monroe soon began to quietly, but thoroughly examine the circumstances of his experiences. The discoveries made in exploring this phenomenon were validated later by the work of Dr. Melvin Morse and others in their work exploring near-death experiences. But as the work continued and technology was developed to stimulate out-of-body experiences, the information gathered was to have a profound effect on the whole of our collective perception of the nature of reality. Monroe, 1977. In 1976, Monroe was issued an original patent for technology that altered brain states through sound. HearMeSync produced binaural beats, which are a series of barely audible tones which play in the background of soft music, barely noticeable beneath the music. The beats are at one rhythm in one ear and a different rhythm in the other, producing a combination that takes the brain to a specific output rate of brain waves. The two hemispheres of the brain act in unison to hear a third signal, the difference between the two tones. The tones counterbalance each other in a way that forms an anchor or a signal which helps you quickly and easily re-enter the trance state when your unconscious mind begins to hear them in the background. The tones begin by synchronizing with the brain waves associated with the normal awakened state of the mind, and then slowly changing them to assist the listener in reaching the alpha level. The signal can only be perceived within the brain by both brain hemispheres working together. The result is a focused, whole brain state known as hemispheric synchronization, or hemisync. This relaxed level was the exact state of mind it was discovered to facilitate not only healing, but out-of-body experiences. Monroe, 1977. The process has been subjected to decades of research and thousands of lab sessions, and has been refined with over 40 years of research and development. Ongoing experimentation, data collection, and analysis are conducted at the Institute's laboratory facilities to demonstrate the correlations between subjective experiential reports and objective electronic measurements. Healing benefits have been extensively documented, ranging from enhanced alertness to relief from insomnia, and the myriad of circumstances that fall between. There are also testimonials regarding profound healing experiences. One woman with an undiagnosed brain injury suffered in a car accident reports using hemisync to reverse a very frustrating condition. After being released from the hospital the same day of an accident that totaled her car, she noticed a severe change in her ability to concentrate. After many months of forgetting how to cook, getting lost, and losing her train of thought, in the middle of a conversation, she began using hemisync to produce a state of relaxation. Within weeks, she became aware of regaining her sense of humor. From there she noticed a gradual regaining of her ability to concentrate. Monroe, 1977. The device, which looks like a bulky set of headphones, is designed to move one's consciousness past the limitation of being within a body. The spectacular success this device has had in facilitating astral travel has been documented in Omni magazine, amongst others, and experienced by thousands. The most profound research for the hemisync device was done by the founder of the Monroe Institute himself. Monroe said, "The greatest illusion is that mankind has limitations. This implies that we have limitless possibilities." The work of the Monroe Institute, with its profound breakthroughs in the use of technology for spiritual exploration, has the potential of enabling vital specifics in the evolution of humankind. Despite Monroe's death in 1995, his institute continues to attract and change forever the visitors to its campus as well as the thousands who have visited the virtual reality of its website. The implications of Monroe's work developing the hemisync device take on a whole new meaning when viewed as to the potential for learning from other times, places, and species. The development of this technology, a technology that enables astral travel and contact with guides and other beings with purposes that are highly relevant to both personal and planetary evolution, brings focus and significance to the whole idea of pursuing the potential ramifications of neurotechnologies. Royal Rife is the inventor of the Rife machine. Has 1996. It is said that one day Royal Rife will be acknowledged as one of history's greatest medical geniuses. In 1902 he discovered the human cancer virus with a microscope that he had to invent himself, since no microscope at the time was powerful enough to detect it. Through endless and exhaustive experimentation and laboratory testing, he discovered that this virus could be killed using certain frequencies that were emitted from a prototype machine he created. He was then successful at destroying cancer in patients who sat within 10 feet of the machine. His legend built from there, and by 1931 he was the most honored among the medical society for his track record of being able to cure cancer almost 100% of the time. The cure for cancer has been found long ago. However, by 1939 these same doctors and scientists who so highly praised him denied that they had ever met Royal Rife. A violent attack was set upon Rife by unseen forces, but they could most likely be identified as the drug companies through the American Medical Association, who had the most to lose from the Rife machine, and Miff Morris Fishbein, who tried to buy the rights to Rife's work unsuccessfully. After that, people who worked with him were harmed and poisoned, Rife's papers were mysteriously lost, and his labs were destroyed by arson. He was shortly indicted and taken to trial for fraudulent medical practices. and for the most part, his life was undone. He became a ruined man. All the doctors who were associated with him lost their medical licenses if they did not stop using Rife's invention, even though they were having incredible success at curing people of cancer. Rife became an alcoholic in order to deal with the terrible turn of events his life has taken. Rife himself was later killed in 1971 by a very lethal dose of Valium at a hospital which some do not believe was an accident. For a long time, Rife's work lay dormant. However, it has been recently revisited. Others are picking up where he left off. It has been discovered that far more than just the cancer virus can be killed with the Rife technology. Any virus can be killed. It just has to be identified, and the right frequency that kills it must be found. Others have begun to catalog this list. Work on cataloging viruses and the frequencies that kill them has begun again. There are now thousands of viruses that can be addressed using the Rife machine. It is not that expensive either, compared to what the medical costs of drugs, doctor's visits, surgeries, and hospitalizations would cost. A Rife mock ice could be purchased for anywhere between $500 and $5,000, depending on how many bells and whistles you want it to come with. If you do an internet search on Rife machine, there will be plenty of results to peruse, but the only place you will be able to purchase one is from overseas. It is still illegal to use them in the United States. Almost all other countries in the world allow the use of the Rife machine, at least for personal purposes or experimental purposes, if not for the public. This does seem quite strange. A Rife machine works by generating a field of frequency or frequencies, and anything within that field that it has been discovered to kill will be killed. It works one of two ways. Some of the less expensive machines entail metal or glass cylinders that you grasp in your hands, while frequencies pulse through them and descend to your body. Some of the more expensive machines entail detailed digital readouts and the ability to diagnose your condition by finding out which viruses are present. You also do not have to hold on to cylinders, and you are able to go about your business in the room as the machine generates the frequency field that addresses the virus. Has 1996. Gilner, 1965, proposed a device that is a way for the naked eye to see the first three layers of the human aura. The device consists of two plates of glass with a dicyanide liquid between them. Dicyanin is a coal tar dye. Some say that the subject's aura can be seen through the screen, while others say that one must look at a bright light first, and then look at the subject through the screen. There have been several doctors in the past years who have used this technology for discerning illnesses in their patients and diagnosing their condition. The induction and measurement of altered states of consciousness by using neurotechnology and transpersonal psychotherapy. The most frequently heard of studies of altered states of consciousness criticism is that they are hoaxes, some form of mental delusion. A good example is the case of Eastern yogis, who for years claimed to be able to control parts of the nervous system and the body such as heart rate, blood pressure, hormone secretion, etc. These claims were considered impossible by Western scientists, whose theories and personal experience denied this possibility. Biofeedback research shows that many of the claims made by physicists yogis, particularly the state of consciousness, can be changed at will by changing the sound pattern, prove to be true. EEG measurements have been based on the research and theories developed from the early work of Adrian and Matthews, 1934. That discovered that the brain could go to certain frequencies with electronic brain stimulation. This work led to the discovery that various frequencies were linked to certain psychological states, Kamiya, 1968, and ultimately the work of Green et al., 1977, demonstrated the ability to control these states and frequencies. You could say that these tests were the first to show how the brain can boot, such as a computer with the right input frequency. What exactly happens neurologically when we walked into alternate states of consciousness is still far from being understood. This gap in our knowledge of these kingdoms is largely due to deficiencies in both research tools and philosophies employed by scientific research, and our general reluctance of society to accept such states as real. Within the traditional scientific practice, it is important to understand how our brains create a bridge to stimulate altered states of consciousness, but understanding it tells us little or nothing about the correlation with psychological phenomena with which we are able to interpret altered states of consciousness. It is this inner cosmological view, or its representation of our quantum reality. Once we accept this premise as our fundamental metaphor for altered states of consciousness, then it is possible to postulate that our brainwave frequencies are measurement indicators of our psychological states and correspond to the various ways in which we produce. That is, these frequencies are the units of our quantum reality. This is how we create, outside the sphere of influence of the Heisenberg principle, that says that our fields are a unified experience. Cade et al., 1979, conducted EEG tests in 70 subjects and measured the SR, electrical resistance of the skin, and with the application of its results to the work of Terry Lesh, 1970, was able to build in the table below that represents the objective and subjective correlates of these states. Table 1 States of consciousness and frequency measurements. Consciousness measured frequency types of waves. Just he is beginning to relax with difficulty quieting the mind. 25 to 20 alpha and beta not very clear conscience or sense of anesthesia. 20 to 16 guess beta alpha continuous calm and relaxed with memories. 16 to 13 alpha continuous without beta theta intermittent state. Definite feeling of floating with increased imagination and more concentration. Sustained 13 to 10 alpha FALLINGCONTINUOUS state to living consciousness, the body modification between awareness internal and external. 10 to 8 alpha continuous state to falling frequency awareness with satisfaction and deep intense alertness and calmness and detachment. 8 to 5 state to continuous alpha close to theta to no way of feeling by intuitive vision synthesis of opposites in a higher unity. Below 4 delta occasionally. One of the determinants of the results of the induction of altered states of consciousness in psychotherapy comes from Penfield and Perot, 1963, who developed a study where a series of what was called in those days outside the body psychic visions were caused that emerged not only for his epileptic patients, but also in patients who had at the operating table for which they stimulated the surface of their brain. In one case study, one of his epileptic patients actually had visions of God descending from heaven. An important factor in the development of neurotechnology step was carried out by Persinger, 1983. Persinger is the director of the neuroscience program at Laurentian University. Persinger, 1983, is able to induce visions of God and other religious and mystical experiences in the laboratory by using a computer and what he calls the Quran helmet that was also given the nickname God helmet. His most important contribution to the induction of altered states of consciousness came when he had a vision as to the origins of spirituality and human evolution. He found that the temporal lobes of the brain are the source of most spiritual and mystical experiences of the scientific literature. The God helmet is a device used to induce altered states of consciousness using weak magnetic signals to direct brain activity. This can induce spiritual experiences and helps autoing transpersonal exploration and transformation of many people. Persinger, 1983, investigated some common perceptions of the inner mind by taking electromagnetic brain patterns seen in people who have near-death experiences. Persinger, 1983, found that it can simulate that by applying complex significant magnetic fields in the brain that can also induce altered state of consciousness such as near-death experiences. Persinger et al., 2000, conducted an experiment that tested the idea that mystical perceptions and paranormal experiences can be triggered by stimulating the nerve activity in the brain. In the experiment, volunteers were blindfolded in a soundproof chamber. This sensory deprivation allowed the mind to concentrate on electromagnetic patterns sent through the brain via a modified helmet. In the experiment, they were able to simulate the exact brain patterns that occur in near-death experiences. Persinger, 2000, suggests that his research will benefit psychotherapy by producing altered states of consciousness including near-death experience, hearing voices, and the sense of a presence as patients will able to deal with things like psychological depression by experiencing these altered states. Persinger, 2000, suggests that these experiences are so strong that they are completely real to the person who has them. As a tool of science, the God helmet technology can bring us valuable new insight into the dark depths of the human mind. Persinger, 1983, conducted experiments of the type of stimulation of the low-level temporal lobes of the brain in order to induce altered states in the subject in the experiment. After an initial feeling of floating in the air, the individual was feeling out of body. Then the experiments used different subjects, but whose constant is to describe their feelings with cosmic and spiritual meanings. Persinger mentions often intense listening experiences in which the person feels that some messages are communicated to him occurs. This transmission is perceived by the individual through a kind of feeling of knowing what happens, without being able to necessarily say that he hears a voice. Persinger suggests that people with epilepsy, temporal lobe dysfunction, are more likely to experiment altered states. With the aid of neurotechnology, people can discover hidden deep subconscious events as well as conflicts of personality, offering the opportunity to research our personality and discover the depths of our psychology. Green, et al., 1970, mentioned that every change in mental emotional state, conscious or unconscious, is accompanied by an appropriate change in the physiological state. Our travels along with the continuous consciousness is manifested by a wide range of psychological and physiological changes, inducing altered states of consciousness take our mental functions to places normally out of reach of our everyday consciousness. These areas are usually reserved for religion, mysticism, and ingestion of psychoactive substances. The experience is one is on a journey through the fall of consciousness into the realm of psychological experience known as the transpersonal. These transpersonal experiences are such that exceed normal limits of our existence and lead the empirical way of knowing, initiating human consciousness in a meeting with those areas of consciousness that are, in normal conditions, being largely inaccessible to us. This process of leaving the empirical normal physical limits of our existence seems to serve as further proof of what was described in this paper. Before that, religious, mystical and philosophical thought are related to quantum physics. When individuals use neurotechnology using the phenomenon of entrainment in the brain for days or weeks in a row, the out-of-body experience seems to be more the rule than the exception. Normally these experiences manifest as spontaneous feelings flying above a landscape. It is nothing strange that the same feeling out of the body that occurs in many different practices aimed at access to altered states of consciousness as well as show as the main subject of near-death experiences. The timing and the subsequent stimulation of the two hemispheres of the brain entrainment can result with the use of neurotechnology, as Fisher and Achille, 1986, suggest. Much of what appears to take place within the transcendental experience of parapsychology seems to be what many of us commonly call the synchronicity. The synchronicity can be defined as a causal connecting principle of coincidence of events in space/time. Carl Jung, who is the first to describe the concept of synchronicity, saw that this state could be related to many transcendental experiences. These synchronistic events can be linked dreams, visions, meditative states, and other inner experiences with tangible events in the life of the subject. A growing number of professional researchers postulated that ESP can be linked to the alpha state. Lawrence, 1972. Dr. Edward Bockert of the American Society for Psychical Research analyzed mental states and has concluded that they are, at least in its early stages, characterized by a highly aroused autonomic nervous system. Lawrence, 1972. Precisely what one finds in the ergotropic excitement associated with the brain and the use of neurotechnologies. Dr. Charles Honorton of the Maimonides Medical Center has also found that the ESP seems to be associated with relaxation, mild dissociation, passivity, and reduced visual imagery. Honorton, 1970, which is commonly found when waves alpha occur with brain entrainment technologies. Indeed, Honorton found that the higher alpha production, the higher the score obtained in the individual CSP. It seems as if many of the psychic states that identified graph as part of the experiential extension beyond the consensus reality and space-time may be associated with changes in one level of consciousness to another. Our present understanding of brain entrainment technology is still in its infancy. However, this article intends to open the eyes of the reader that this technology has great potential, particularly for transpersonal therapies. This article introduced neurotechnology-based technologies including quantum biofeedback. The latter has proven curative value for particular diseases that seem to be psychosomatic, and also has been proven to help to measure state of consciousness of individuals. Transpersonal psychology was presented as a paradigm that recognizes the immortality of consciousness and relies on spiritual concepts that have roots in mystic religions as reincarnation and survival of consciousness after the brain death. The immortality of consciousness is based largely on the quantum theory explaining the origin of consciousness and its connection to the universe. Neurotechnology explores the use of technologies of sound, light, and radio frequency to control the frequency of brain waves, with the reason to induce altered states of consciousness. Altered states of consciousness have been proposed as therapies for healing in transpersonal psychology. These therapies recognize the spiritual essence of the individual and are based on the concept that psychological illnesses are rooted in the spirit and not in the brain. Once the patient knows the root of his or her problems, seems to find the answer to his or her anxieties, and can self-heal with these transpersonal experiences. Inducing altered states of consciousness with neurotechnology is a relatively new concept, and, although there are serious studies, they are not incorporated into traditional medicine more than anything by a lack of understanding of this technology in traditional medicine. The aim of this paper is to open the eyes of therapists about the potential of these technologies in the use of transpersonal therapies. The phenomenon of parapsychological channeling in altered states of consciousness as a tool for transpersonal psychology. Parapsychology research focuses on seemingly anomalous experiences. The three main areas of parapsychological research are extrasensory perception, ESP, and psychokinesis, PK. These two are often called psi phenomena. The third main area is the survival hypothesis, the notion that some element of human existence survives death. Irwin and Watt, 2007. Musso, 1994, suggests that the phenomena of ESP and PK are transpersonal in nature and part of parapsychology. A new paradigm of psychology is transpersonal psychology. Transpersonal psychology considers that the psyche is multidimensional and that there are several levels of consciousness, and each has different characteristics and is governed by different laws. Transpersonal psychology does not deny other schools of thought as psychoanalysis, and it does not arise as opposed. The right thing to say is that it attempts to go further. For the transpersonal vision, Freud developments have been of fundamental value in the development of the psychological science, to include the idea of the unconscious in a discipline that was tied to the positivist rationalism. Although psychoanalysis opened the possibilities of understanding of the human psyche, transpersonal psychology goes further by promoting the inclusion of the spiritual dimension of the human being. The main goal of transpersonal theory is to integrate the spiritual experience within a broader understanding of the human psyche. The most used tool by professionals in transpersonal psychology is the use of transpersonal experiences through altered states of consciousness for self-exploration, such as the holotropic therapy developed by Stanislav Grof. Channeling is a parapsychological phenomenon which is considered an altered state of consciousness. It is the aim of this article to discuss the usefulness of the channeling in transpersonal psychology that studies man from several dimensions, including what is unseen, but is manifested in our reality. The channeling is a parapsychological phenomenon which is considered an altered state of consciousness that can also lead to the exploration of the inner self and the transpersonal psychoanalysis in a similar way as holotropic therapy does. Channeling, as defined by John Clemo, 1988, it would be receiving information through paranormal sources. According to Clemo, 1988, channeling is the communication of information to a physically embodied human being, or their intermediaries, from a source that is said to exist in some another level or dimension of reality other than the physical plane, as we know, and not from the conscious mind of the channeler. Another definition of channeling, which identifies the process by which a person transfers messages from a source presumed not embodied and external to their consciousness. Channeling often uses trance that does not stop being a form or aspect of mediumship. Chandley Margot, 1986, in his doctoral thesis, believes that this non-physical energy is an intrinsic part of every human being, and that the reason why the label as being with personality is located outside of us channeling would, in this context, be the only way to communicate with that energy in a form of transpersonal psychoanalysis using the paranormal phenomenon of channeling. Scott Rogo, 1975, established differences between mediumship and channeling. According to Rogo, serious mediumship is the art of attracting the spirits of dead people with the specific objective to communicate with their families, while channeling would try to attract some undefined nature of intelligence for the purpose of promoting and encouraging education, spiritual and philosophical discussion. However, we must exclude from channeling what is known as ESP, i.e. telepathy, which would be the transmission of information between two embodied people, since in channeling the source or transmitter is at some other level of different reality from perceiving it. Houston Smith, 1965, rather than entities, prefers to use the term psychic centers, and this encompasses a variety of types of living beings individualized that could function as a communicators through the channeling process. We would also consider, to talk about channeling, there are other levels, dimensions, or planes of reality, where only the physical would be one more of these realities. Other parallel planes exist where the various doctrines or different movements have their place and could be listed in terms of astral plane, mental plane, causal plane, etc. Throughout history there have been various entities that came to enjoy some popularity. According to Cunningham, 2012, the Seth entity manifested through a medium called Jane Roberts. Seth says that we are multidimensional in nature and exist outside of time and space as part of a wider reality and will be evolving within the universe. We create our own reality projecting energy outward and thus form the physical world in which we learn our creativity. This ongoing work is what makes the universe is constantly developing, and to modify our personal world we must change ourselves so that we change what we project or express. Seth's teachings include reincarnation. Although we are contemplated as relatively immortal beings, we cover many physical incarnations. Jane Roberts had the first conduit through automatic writing in 1963, which lasted until 1984, the year of her death. Jane Roberts described the process as a situation, as if she had taken an hallucinogen drug, and in this situation she had an avalanche of great new ideas that flooded her mind, making it a receiving station messages. Jane Roberts, Cunningham, 2012, suggested that individualized energy is materialized within our physical existence. To learn to create energy and ideas to make physical parts, we project these ideas into an object so that in this way we can relate to us. In this context, the object is materialized thought. The idea has obvious similarities to certain areas of the Buddhist philosophy and some modern cosmological theories. Jane began receiving channeling from Seth in a clairvoyant way. Then she moved to a deep trance on occasions. Seth described himself as an individual consciousness, energy, personality, essence, no longer limited by physical reality. Jane Roberts always wondered if this phenomenon was real or Seth belonged to a part of her own psyche. Seth, on the other hand, seemed to reveal an alleged absolute knowledge, and the explanation that it gave Jane is that our current figures could be aspects of a broader which distant consciousness. The individual is only a part, albeit in the case of an inviolable and unique part. Our personalities would be composed by many other aspects, and each of them would be dominant in other realities. Besides Seth, Jane Roberts channeled also two other sources, a French Impressionist painter of the 19th century, Paul Cézanne, and the famous American psychologist William James. Roberts believed that she perceived the personality of James Williams as a construction formed unconsciously, as an automatic process. Cephalid, the material is very prolific, and its main contribution is that each of us are able to create our reality through our own beliefs and desires. That is, we would live this our present life as one of the many personalities experience, each within their respective level of reality, and another as part of a broader nature also learns and evolves. The level of the texts left by Jane's F dictation are philosophically very high, although debatable, as well as expressing general concepts, answering all a person of high scientific, philosophical and humanistic preparation. Usually, the first idea that comes to mind is that the neophyte channels are people with psychological pathology, if not worse, and that basically is all a sham. We must admit that, at least in part, such an opinion has some justification given the authentic falsehoods and scams that have come to mount on the issue. Mayers, 1895, speaks of subliminal and the phenomenon of channeling as it was a part of the mind that transcended the control of consciousness and was wider and deeper faculty. So through this subliminal, one could access the mysteries of a broader universe of a superior spirit with more energy and possibilities. This concept of subliminal could help to explain the channeling phenomenon and its use in psychoanalysis to the transpersonal level. Russell Wallace speaks of the existence of higher powers in the context of a hierarchy of spiritual nature in creation. He said that there must be an invisible world of the spirit that causes changes in the world of matter. The evolution of this planet must be guided and assisted by upper and invisible intelligences, to which man, as a spiritual being, is exposed. Furthermore, it would be likely that these beings of superior intelligence lived in a hierarchy above ours. In addition, Wallace adds that these spiritual beings could communicate with us via telepathy. This could provide a gateway to the acquisition of universal knowledge through parapsychology. Kotler, 1974. Thomson J. Hudson, 1904, expounded his theory of objective mind, which would deal with everyday experience, and a subjective, which would be oriented inward, would control our inner being, and would live in the deepest levels of the self with the powers employed sewers and other paranormal experiences. Richard M. Buck, 2009, also differed less than our simple awareness of higher consciousness, or cosmic. He worked with subjects who practiced the channeling and admitted that was natural in all of us. That would be related to the exact extent that we consciously realize our oneness with eternal life and open ourselves to the divine energy. He thought that we had in ourselves the properties and powers of eternal life, and we constitute channels through which they can act in intelligence and power. All these theories are against the tide with respect to traditional psychology, that believes that the unconscious is, as a closed system, and therefore impossible to communicate with the mental or spiritual universe. Current theories of the psyche propose that we each have a conscious part, would work within the limits of normal perceptions, individual memory, and an unconscious part, that would be a deposit of perceptions and memories are still not ready to emerge into consciousness. This unconscious mind would be responsible for channeling, and therefore this could be seen as a tool to explore the unconscious mind and the true self of the individual. The current experimental systems are strongly based on behaviorism. Behavioral psychologists believe that learned behaviors are based largely on conscious association structures built in the mind by various environmental stimuli and internal configurations. Behaviorists believe that ignore the fundamentals of much of our own conduct, which apparently work in a field based on conditioning beyond the control of consciousness. The most important type of conduct in channeling, the individual hears a voice that seems to come from him or herself, or anyone around him or he, but uses its vocal cords to speak, or notes with surprise that someone, who is not then uses his or her hand to write. Based on the theories of conditioning, these situations can be interpreted as functions of certain structures of associations formed unconsciously by memories, mental game configurations and combinations of creativity. Sigmund Freud, 1964, talked of the paranormal phenomena related to channeling, although his whole life was skeptical about this phenomena. He said that this type of behavior would be sought to recover by supernatural means, the lost illusion in this world. Channeling was for Freud the result of dissatisfaction, desires, and manifestations of repressed material in the unconscious. Voices, visions, and expressions of repressed material would be channeling the unconscious and seek a way out. Jung, 1936, said that the psyche is not an indivisible unit, but a divisible whole, in fact more or less divided, and was composed of many complex psychic materials. The ego would be the characteristic center of our psyche, but only one among others. Jung also thought that the existence of a communication from disembodied spirits can be justified through these complex materials that are repressed and away from the usual conscious perception. These are complex, he said, could be designed in a configuration perceived by the individual as alien to him or herself. Jung said, the spirit, seen from a psychological perspective, is an unaware complex autonomous psychic material that appears as a projection, because it has direct contact with the ego. Moreover, he also believed that grim appearance of the spirit is the dark side of everyone, the less evolved and understood, sometimes part, that could manifest in the form of something or someone outside the self. He also gave another possible explanation based on what he called the collective unconscious. Its components are not personal, but collective, that is, not belonging to a single individual, but a group of them, an entire nation, or even all mankind. These components are not acquired during the life of the individual, but are innate products and configurations, the fundamental concepts, that have always been the basis of human thought, the full circle of mythological themes. The channeling has also been compared with hypnosis, with trance, and dissociated states. It's hard to grasp the relationship may have channeling with hypnosis, as is the fact that subjects that are more easily hypnotized in turn are the ones most likely to be channelers, although it is possible that the latter are self-hypnotized to exercise channeling. The hypnotic state would be easier to access channeling messages. Through hypnosis, the subject, the channeler, breaks his mindset and prejudices away, making it much easier to channel. It is also true that the subject would be well disposed to suggestions more easily, since it can induce the hypnotic state channels through to deeper stages of hallucinations. Charles Dart, 1972, when he was studying hypnosis, perceived that he could generate in a subject an entity with an apparent independent existence of the subject. The subject perceived as if someone was speaking from outside, that is, that although some cases may be due to channeling if manipulation, this does not mean that all channeling cases are related to hypnosis. In effect, for example, we find burnt trees in the countryside, still standing, and that happens when lightning strikes on them during a storm. That does not mean that all charred trees still standing that we find are in the fields and forests have suffered a lightning strike. There are multiple causes that can produce a similar effect. There are diseases that resemble channeling, such as delusions and hallucinations, identity disorders, schizophrenia, behavior simulation, depersonalization, and dissociation, multiple personalities, etc. However, we should develop more detailed and careful studies before putting labels of mental disorders to those who act as channels. Parapsychology has also contributed to the explanation of the channeling phenomena, especially in what has been called psychical research. Parapsychology has studied the ESP, extrasensory perception, information acquired by unusual channels, with what would be an explanation of channeling. With respect to the channels of the person that seeks from a medium to communicate with another person and deceased, we must be careful that the medium is not telepathically capturing the information contained in the subject who has attended to query. We must also mention that not only telepathy could capture the information, but also through other information area that Teilhard H. Arden, 1965, proposed as lying around it, an evolving field of knowledge, which they called noosphere. Clearly, any of these options connects with the collective unconscious of Jung. It exists in the annals of parapsychology, an anecdote to live in that may be relevant. In 1973, a group of people created a fictitious entity that gave the name of Phillips. This being manifested by strokes, realizations, voices, etc. In previous times when Phillips' figure was created, each attendee at the meeting incorporating personality traits professionals, etc., distinct and integrated a story that were supposed to be those of the body, soon appeared a presence that began to respond to questions from the group, and attended by the name Phillips. This event is brought to prove that, despite speaking seriously, and with sufficient rigor, what could be considered an authentic channel was merely the result of individual and unconscious of those involved in the experience minds. Aldous Huxley, 1945, also talked that each of us has a high potential of mind, a mind without restrictions, but in our quality of animals we have above all the instinct to survive. In this sense, a mind without restrictions should be targeted in any case through the reducing valve of the brain and nervous system. Some people, however, seem to be born with a kind of detour that bypasses the pressure-reducing valve. In other words, temporary shift can be purchased either spontaneously or as a result of deliberate retreat. Groff, 1994, cites the transpersonal concept holds that there is a broad spectrum of altered states of consciousness, and one of them is useful in power and specific in their functions. Some of these are true higher states. Since each state of consciousness reveals his own vision of reality, we can deduce that reality, as we know it, and this is the only way we know it, is only relatively real, in other words, is to hold genuine psychosis in a single reality. The father of transpersonal psychology, Stanislav Grof, was the first to carry out such channeling experiences under the influence of drugs, particularly LSD, whose composition has many similarities with serotonin. Groff, 1973, explains, the subject affected by LSD can, for example, suddenly enter into a trance-like state of the medium. His appearance and his gestures are alien, and his voice changed completely. You can speak foreign languages, or write texts through automatic writing. You can have encounters with spiritual beings, or astral bodies of people could even have many of the characteristics of the so-called spirit possession. Groff has used the experiences of channeling as a tool for self-exploration of the individual to find possible causes of psychological problems such as depression and psychosis. Persinger, 1983, is skeptical about the paranormal origin of channeling and gives an explanation of physiological origin. In one experiment, he stimulated the current low level of the temporal lobes of the brain in order to induce channeling experiences in the subject of study. After an initial feeling of floating in the air, the individual felt out of body. Then the experiments recreated experiences that varied from one subject to another, but whose constant is to describe their feelings with cosmic and spiritual meanings. Persinger says often intense listening experiences in which the person feels that some messages are communicated to occur. This transmission is perceived by the individual through a kind of feeling of knowing what happens without being able to necessarily say that here's a voice. Persinger suggests that people with epilepsy, i.e. temporal lobe dysfunction, has been found to possess a kind of constant form of channeling. Another novel contribution to the possible explanation of channeling was carried out by physicist Frank Barr, 1983, who has issued a whole theory based on the peculiarities of the organic compound called melanin and the brain equivalent neuromelanin. It is a substance that would act between mind and brain as an intermediary. According to Barr, filamentous cells have bumps called glycocalyx antennae that could act in strong overlap with neuromelanin. Thus they transform the received waves of a variety of lengths and frequencies, including light and mechanical impulses and vice versa. Vibratory waves, once inside the cells, would move through these through-called microtubules to melanin, which is capable of converting light into sound and sound into light. From this pattern, it is evident the possibility of transforming inner voices emissions received as waves in the brain, and vice versa. However, Frank Barr does not stop here, but also extrapolated that there may be different standards of living at different levels of wave frequencies, inhabited by beings of difficult objective understanding from our usual physical reality. Despite the different views of the phenomenon of channeling, the truth is that it is possible to use it as a tool for exploration of subconscious. Although some cases are unexplained, many of these appear to be manifestations of the individual's own unconscious and could reveal information that could help a patient to understand the origin of their own psychological problems. holotropic therapy to alter the state of consciousness in transpersonal psychology and paranormal experiences. Throughout this chapter we will limit ourselves to the study of Stanislav Grof, 1994, and holotropic therapy. We will also deal with specific states of meditation quoted above, yoga, and mystical ecstasy. As we said, Stanislav Grof is one of the founders of transpersonal psychology. He is a psychiatrist of Czech origin, who worked for most of his career in the United States. He was professor of psychiatry at Johns Hopkins, and his last work was at the S. Allen Institute, the Center of Transpersonal Psychology, for many years. Grof has studied the effect of LSD in a particularly extensive and profound way. In the 60s he directed about 3,000 sessions with the drug and had access to about 2,000 case histories of other cases that he had not spoken personally before LSD was banned in the U.S. What is holotropic therapy? Holotropic therapy, or holonomic integration, is a way to produce an altered state of consciousness without drugs. How is it done? This is done with hyperventilation by making an individual deeply and rapidly breathe for several minutes. Grof, with this technique, causes a pulmonary hyperventilation. It is also accompanied by music and some verbal guidance from who leads the session. The subject remains lying down, eyes closed, in order to facilitate the alteration of consciousness. This technique produces a decrease of carbon dioxide in blood, which must also have a level, neither too high nor too low. This sharp decline in the level of carbon dioxide in turn causes a neurological crisis, and through the brain acts in a similar way to a drug. This causes a crisis that leads to an altered state of consciousness, and allows the study of the consciousness of the individual from that new state. Stanislav Grof, 1994, uses the experiential healing power of this state of consciousness. If psychoanalysts studied dreams, Grof studied the induced hallucinations, hallucinatory or psychedelic states, 1994. Consider the parallelism between dreams and hallucinations caused. The dreams that so keenly study psychoanalysts have certain characteristics. First, the symbolism. What we dream is pregnant with symbols. It is a symbol in itself, has a symbolic power, and can be interpreted as a symbol. As a way of seeing things here we can also apply the concept of David Bohm, 1990. The dream is the expression, while it is the symbol of what is behind the subconscious, of what is hidden, what is involved. It is a holographic way of saying that everything is in everything. The dream contains everything that symbolizes all that is behind. In a detail explained in a way, symbolizes, it contains all that is involved behind unto you the power and meaning of dreams. Moreover, the second characteristic of dreams is the condensation of ideas or symbols. One thing not only symbolizes a particular type of phenomena, but symbols can be presented together and condensed, and can be presented in a dream, while several symbols, and in turn, each symbol can represent different ideas. This world of condensation also senses that has something to do with the holographic that we have discussed, with the expression of all in all is also a feature of this condensation, and must be partly based on it. This condensation of ideas, symbols, is the second feature of a dream, namely, the mishmash of various symbols, and each symbol can represent several things well. The third characteristic of a dream is Freud's discovery, 1978, that in them the sublimation of desires are poured. The dream is the fulfillment of the subliminal wish, or even the threat. Sometimes the dream is a threat. It would seem that even in a greater number of occasions, the dream is then a threat and we previously feared, or it represents the realization of a traumatic event. Under the guidance of Stanislav Grof, 1994, psychedelic states have very similar characteristics to dreams. The first feature is its symbolic character. Obviously they have a symbolic, like dreams, that are its foundation character. While it is noteworthy that many times we find more than symbols, we find experiences of real events that were, are, or will be, and with which the subject identifies in an authentic journey of the mind to the implicate order. The second feature is condensation, as in dreams, condensation of experiences, so that Stanislav Grof speaks of condensed experiences, or COEX for short, condensed experiences. sees many memories from different periods of life, at all levels, are mixed. In any psychedelic state we can find biographical material which may relate to traumas, perinatal issues, transpersonal materials. They may appear paranormal topics related to reincarnation, animal identification issues, mythological sequences, etc. All this, as we say, in condensed states COEX. The third characteristic of psychedelic states is the role of the traumas of life. As conventional psychology, especially psychoanalysis, usually has great value in the trauma of separation from the mother, all focused through the Oedipus complex, in the experiential work with altered states of consciousness or particularly appreciates the danger of killed. For example, as we said earlier, psychoanalysts would value in a sick the problem of their separation from the mother. By contrast, in the experiential techniques, holotropic work is the importance of the child, for example, has had pneumonia and see your life in danger. By this way of assessing the trauma of the feeling of danger of life, Stanislav Grof, 1994, passes specially study the birth trauma. Grof particularly appreciates the birth trauma, the trauma of the child leaves the womb. This study has a previous history, which began with Otto Rank, 1929, which long preceded the discoveries with LSD. It was the time of Freud, who also met and agreed with the psychological trauma of birth, although for Freud sexual dynamism was most important. Otto Rank explains that the birth trauma is the source of anxiety and primary repression, as it somehow begins at that time and sets symbolically a central conflict between the desire to return to the uterus and fear to do. In this scheme the birth trauma is a symbol, and, similarly, desire or fear of returning to the womb. It seems that all serve as image, and each of them, every moment of our life, is a symbol of personality, for example, at birth, but every moment of our lives can serve as a symbol of personality. For some mystical traditions know the principle, while all is in the all, it is especially true that the all in all. When someone is talking now, somehow, at this moment, this symbolized his entire life. When each of us is listening now, we can say that this moment of each, in some way, represents your whole life. We will study the findings of Stanislav Grof, 1994, on these states, these perinatal experiences, these traces of birth, these footprints of everything that happens at the time of birth of each person. What they are called perinatal matrices. We will study the perinatal matrices as Stanislav Grof, 1994. The divided into 4 types of basic perinatal matrices, or perinatal matrices, which expressed with 3 letters, MPB1, MPB2, MPB3, and MPB4, 4 models corresponding to the 4 stages of labor. Stage number 1, it is uterine period, when the child is still in the womb. The number stadium, the period of labor contractions, when the labor pains start due to uterine contractions, and the resulting pain. This, presumably, have to produce a setback, some discomfort to the creatures inside. The stage number 3, period progression. In the first part of childbirth the uterus contracts, but the fetus, the child does not progress. Cervix, uterus output is still closed, and therefore the child is stopped. But nevertheless, in the period number 3, time to progression, the neck is opened and delivery, and progresses through the birth canal. The contractions produced by the uterus as well as in the previous period did not make progress. Childbirth could not progress, because it was a time to eventually lead to the opening of the cervix. In this period, as the cervix is now fully open, the fetus progresses on its way out to the outside. The stage number 4, it is the moment of birth, time of birth. Well, this is what Grof notes. Psychedelic experience is reflected in these basic perinatal matrices detected in altered states of consciousness. Also observed experiences that reflect the stage of the MPB1, the intrauterine existence, can do it peaceful, or reflect disturbances. Room prepared for a session. Holotropic breathing, intrauterine life. The intrauterine been peaceful, when experience indicates that all is well in the womb. Then we, for example, symbolic experiences to awareness raising of the ocean, found within an ocean, an underwater life, or interstellar space. experiences that reflect Mother Nature, heaven or paradise promised by various cultures. In short, peaceful states of mind, beautiful natural scenery, or positive transpersonal experiences. We have already mentioned that different things with the same features of dreams and psychedelic states of condensation of images are mixed. Groff also observed and studied altered states of consciousness or unpleasant experiences that reflect disturbances of intrauterine life, and these disturbances identifies with images of underwater hazards, images of polluted waterways, contaminated the inhospitable nature, with insidious demons, and even with nausea, dyspepsia, and intestinal disorders of various kinds. Developing a holotropic breathing session MPB2 are representations and experiences that represent the second stage of labor, i.e., the period of uterine contraction. The child is constrained during this period by uterine spasms, and then given a series of sensations, a series of experiences, which has been captured in these altered states of consciousness, Groff 1994. For example, overwhelming sense of growing anxiety, and vital to awareness raising of imminent danger, experiences whirling funnel, or pulling of the subject, experiences of being swallowed by a monster, dragon, or whale, experiences of being attacked by an octopus, or a huge tarantula, descent into a dangerous world, hero's journey, or memories of situations in which the individual is a victim of an overwhelming destructive force, I found in a hopeless situation, being trapped, identification with prisoners in dungeons or concentration camps, etc. All this can present with features of condensed experiences. Naturally, in one case a type of these experiences are presented, and in another a different show. Even in one case may have different experiences that belong to different levels. For what we were saying that everything is in everything, traumas of adulthood can be mixed with life traumas of perinatal experiences. Likewise, at the time of these experiences of altered states of consciousness, psychosomatic symptoms such as stress, pain, hunger, thirst, sore rectum, bladder, sexual frustration, hypertension, uterine or vaginal spasms, testicular pain may occur, etc. And we come to the MPB3, that is, to what happens in the third stage of labor. We have said that is when the fetus progresses through the birth canal itself. Experiences, in this case, are not only feel victim. Previously, summarizing the experiences in the womb, these could be of mildness, or it can be a problem of feeling bad, but when things are going well is an oceanic paradise experience life, to feel so peaceful. When labor contractions begin, what would be the typical feeling trapped? Here in the third quarter, when the fetus progresses through the birth canal, the experiences are of being victim and aggressor, and not only of being trapped, and so, sadomasochistic experiences, bloody sacrifices, self-sacrifice, torture occur, execution, murder, rape, also experiences death struggles, violent scenes of war, risky adventures, volcanoes, earthquakes, lightning, and thunder, atomic bombs. They may also appear demonic elements, covens, satanic orgies, black masses, or experiences of wallowing in a dunghill, of crawling through the sewers, eating feces, drinking blood, or urine, or intense sensual and sexual experiences. Finally, we will deal with the MPB4, that is, the last of perinatal experiences, preferred at birth. Relief and relaxation here represented by intense daylight is experienced, following the same expressions of Stanislav Grof, 1994. The altered states of consciousness discovers traces of these perinatal experiences, and repeating his own description see the following: visions of dazzling white and golden light, striking manifestations of divine archetypal entities. In a way we could say that angels, experience of meeting and union, sense of spiritual liberation, redemption, and salvation, memories of personal success, releasing unpleasant tensions, experience sexual orgasm, or give birth. Now that we have discussed and summarized these perinatal experiences, these basic perinatal matrices talk of transpersonal experiences that go in all these psychedelic states, let the realms of transpersonal experiences. Stanislav Grof observes a quantum leap from individual experiences to the experiences of cosmic breadth. Note that the individual feels that his consciousness has expanded, and cases of regression and identifications of previous fetal memories, to which we quoted in the basic perinatal matrices, other fetal memories, or even sequences at the cellular level of existence as spomoric memories of ancestors, and paranormal manifestations, like identification with animal ancestors, and a deep sense of reliving episodes of a previous incarnation. Also, he notes experiences merging with another person, identifying with it. That is, it does not mean that one has been all that experience, but sometimes simply merges with another person, an animal, a thing, a situation. Experiences of fusion with another person and identification with it. Experiences turn into the consciousness of animals, plants, or even, as we have said, objects. Experiences of paranormal ESP, encounters with departed human beings, etc. Together we must see the difference between relived experiences, like reliving episodes of a previous incarnation, and experiences of identification, as identified with animal ancestors, and experiences of merging with someone else, tune into the consciousness of another person, or tune into the consciousness of animals or plants, and even objects. Of these studies Graf just discussed, they are to highlight three aspects: the COEX experiences condense the therapeutic aspect, and the aspect of holotropic wisdom. First things first, the aspect COEX. Notice that everything just described, with images that symbolize the birth perinatal problems, or uterine, accompanied at the same time, condensed, other images of the individual unconscious. These perinatal images are properly the individual unconscious, and have other images of the individual unconscious, like those of other traumas that happened during life. They also fit other images of the transpersonal unconscious as identification images of animals, other lives, other times, in other situations, with certain mythological situations, transpersonal truly mystical images such as cosmic identification. In short, it happens this aspect COEX in which images can be intermixed individual unconscious and images of transpersonal unconscious. Second is to highlight the therapeutic aspect. This is a psychoanalysis to transpersonal level that serves as an experiential catharsis. Catharsis and healing, overcoming. Sometimes it serves to overcome a karma. When one has noticed he has lived recalled situations karmic above, you may be used to overcome the karma in which it is immersed, and this regardless of the reality of that karma. The third aspect is the holotropic wisdom, well worth a detailed review. Holotropic model to what we might define as the set of moments when consciousness is not limited by space and time, nor linear causality, the cause and effect that we continually see in everyday life. There are two types of consciousness, the holotropic awareness and holotropic consciousness, Graf 1994, which are opposed. Let's start with holotropic otherwise, which is holotropic of hyle, matter. We can make a portrait of this holotropic consciousness by his statements, always looking for words of Stanislav Grof. Matter is solid, two objects cannot occupy the same place at the same time. Past events are unrecoverable. Future events are not accessible now. You cannot be in more than one place at one time. The whole is greater than the hand. Nothing can be true and false at the same time. As we can see is overwhelming and undeniable truths. A typical example of this concept is holotropic conventional scientific conception that scientists have so clear nowadays. Let a description now holotropic consciousness, hollows whole. Also using the descriptions of Stanislav Grof, time and space are arbitrary, solidity and discontinuity of matter are illusory. The same space can be occupied by many objects. Past and future are experiential in this. One can experiential in several places at once, or in several historical moments, and within this holotropic consciousness, being part and be all supports and truth with lies, shaped vacuum. This holotropic consciousness occurs in a continuous way. The experience is with LSD, then holotropic therapy, practicing Stanislav Grof and his wife Christina, or psychosis, where it is very common. Just a way to identify a psychosis is this constancy and holotropic variety of thoughts, rather than holotropics. Partially seen holotropic unconsciousness is the individual who is sane. He knows what he does, who knows where it goes. It says apparently incontrovertible truths. Meanwhile, holotropic consciousness is itself the person who can say that is in a state of psychotic confusion, in a state of confusion for drug use, etc. But things are not as simple as it seems, because the individual who practices a too strictly the holotropic thought is too far from the authentic sanity, just as it is the individual who practices holotropic thinking to extreme. It seems that life, the art of traveling through life, is like walking on wire stretched in a vacuum. You cannot deviate too far to one side or to the other. And, although not enough, being too partisan of holotropic consciousness is also a way to deviate from the authentic sanity. So, we end up talking about a superior sanity, where there is good interaction, and holotropic and holotropic modes. And upper sanity and a deep awareness of the significance of the spiritual dimension is given. When a conscience formed in the meaning of the spiritual dimension, and certain acts of the new physics has really, the individual has a vision in which is holotropic. Holotropic has many more aspects, and in any case, as Stanislav Grof says, the actual sanity rests on balance, the entente, good interaction between the holotropic and holotropic. Stanislav Grof expresses the superior wisdom. The individual focuses everyday reality with absolute seriousness and a full personal and social responsibility, while maintaining the relative value to awareness raising from that perspective. In everyday reality, the individual must maintain absolute seriousness and very immersed in holotropic full personal and social responsibility, but simultaneously keeping to awareness raising of the relative value of perspective. When this perspective recognizes that it has a relative value, it is already in a way holotropic consciousness. To put it another way, the new paradigm that presumed to be holotropic, but at the same time, they conveniently integrate aspects holotropic, a profound way of seeing reality makes us conceive. So far we have come Stanislav Grof studies with LSD and holotropic therapy. Then we speak, to finish the issue, specific meditative states or states of higher consciousness. There is indeed a perceptual sensory awareness of the senses, one intellectual or cognitive consciousness, which is the knowledge of reason, and there is also a spiritual consciousness. The spiritual consciousness is what is going to search through specific meditative states, i.e., yoga, and the mystical ecstasy. Try it, but first let's mention the Schechter effect, as outlined by Daniel Goleman, 2006, author of the famous book Emotional Intelligence. One of the psychologists Transpersonal defining this effect, the cognitive biases determine the interpretation and clarifying internal stimuli. In other words, everyone interprets things his way by cognitive bias. Daniel Goleman, 2006, gives examples such as St. Paul, who says that his cosmic consciousness always equated to that of Jesus Christ, the ever sees Jesus Christ. The universe is psychocosmic. It seems that the mental and psyche are two very different things, but basically, in this ongoing matter field, and even pure vibrational field, the material and the psychic are two ways that are not as contradictory as it seems to holotropic consciousness, but in the background are a continuum going from one to another slightly. Thus, altered states of consciousness are caused by breathing holotropic, a search of the true self that can cause such paranormal experiences, and reaching the essential structure of the universe also arrive at the cosmic consciousness.